Okay, hello everyone. Today we have Honglo Wang on our call. Honglo Wang is a bit of a sarcastic, funny, I wouldn't say legend, but he's pretty well known in the donor industry because he pops up every now and then with a bunch of sarcastic posts. And I've heard some interesting things about him. I've heard that he has donated 400 children in Asia, which I can't really believe. So I'm going to ask him a few questions about that today. Um, so I sent him the right link. Now, and so everyone can join. I have a new setup. I put on the suit because Hunglo likes wearing suits during his calls. So I decided to put on a suit as well. Glasses are going to stay on. The blue light and want to sleep well later. So I decided to put on the suit to make it a little bit funnier. Because I know one podcast where he put on a suit and it looked funny. So I wanted to kind of level his energy. Yeah, so let's see when they join. Hello, hello.
Can you see me loud and clear? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you and I can see you. Hello, how are you?
Good, good, good. How you doing? Let me know when you're ready to start recording. I'm going to record on my end and make you famous.
Okay, if you say so. Yeah, I'm recording on my end already. It's already on.
Excellent.
But we'll edit it afterwards. I have an assistant who does that.
Sure, sure. All right. Well, let's do a 1, 2, 3. I'm going to start recording and go.
Okay, wonderful. Hey, Hungo, how are you?
Good, good. How are you doing, sir?
Good, good. You live in Florida, right?
Most of the time, I own multiple businesses, so I get to travel around a little bit. And you can imagine having a large family. I try to pop in and visit as much as I can. You and I are really in a unique position in the world. Only a few men throughout history have gotten to do something like this, and it's typically been wealthy royalty. So we have to adapt to that. If we're going to have any level of relationship with our children and the mothers of our children. So I get to travel a little bit, but most of the time I try to stay local here in the southeast of the U.S. How about you, my friend? How are you, sir? You
I'm good.
stay in this area? Which area do you primarily spend most of your time? And where do the mothers of your children like to stay? Do they try to stay near you?
So I have been traveling as a donor for the last 1.5 years. I've donated in about 10 different countries now. I also have
Oh,
inside of my suit here it says Donor Dan, and then there's the lining is the world map because that was one of the main reasons I decided to donate. Is my father is a donor too, and I have 21 half siblings because of him. And I realized,
oh,
yeah, I'm the most open donor conceived donor out there right now. There's a few in the past that were like a little bit hidden about it because their own donor was a bank donor, so they had to hide it and they couldn't talk about it or they couldn't be donors openly because of the anonymous part and the risks that come with it. But my half siblings are all known, and my father is known too. He became a known donor, open donor when I was 15 years old. So because of him, I wanted to be a donor, and I donated in about 10 countries so far. I've helped 16 families. The mothers of the children, I don't relate to them as my children. I relate to them as my biological offspring. They live all around the world, and yes, there's only 5 born so far. The other 13 are on the way. But I moved to Hallandale Beach, or this area here, southern Florida, because it's located so well in the, you know, in between the Western countries that have a high demand for donors. So I can help recipients from California. I can help recipients from Europe. There's some demand in Asia as well. So I go to Asia once a year to donate there too. But that's really the main reason I moved here, and this is now my home base and the base of the Open Donor Association as well. I'm trying to make open donorship something normal, something great and wonderful to talk about. Yeah.
It should be. It should be. It was throughout all of our history. Think of Genghis Khan. Everybody thinks of him when they think of a harem or somebody having a lot of children. Everybody knew who Genghis Khan was. They knew who his children were. His children knew their father. It shouldn't be a mystery. If you look back through European history or even Native American history, the wealthy, powerful men had lots of children, and the children knew the father. It wasn't like what's going on right now. And the moment the federal government is willing to step in, step up, and offer some level of legal protection here in the United States for donors, there will be no donors. There should never be secrecy in paternity. That's ridiculous for somebody to say, I don't know who my father is. And I don't think this is an accident. I've been writing a book on this for about a decade now, and I'm still working on the book. It's not ready because when I'm finished, it's going to be finite and definite. But what I've noticed is that a certain community is being targeted with the legislation and the medical practices, because if that community was able to say, hey, I know who my father is, and then you've got an inheritance of wealth, and without that community never can really financially grow, and it limits them. So, let's say you've got a donor father who, let's say he's wealthy. Let's say he's worth, he's Elon Musk with 13 children, and he's worth $1 trillion. If Musk can't pass on that wealth to his children, then his children don't really have any power or control, and that limits what they can do legally in American legislation. So by creating the environment we're in right now, where legally most donors have to remain anonymous when working through banks, it really hurts the community, and it hurts the children of the women in that community. And that's probably going to be my summation and ultimate resolution at the end of the book, because I've interviewed a lot of people. You have, Laura High has, and so has Adam Hooper did in Australia, and we're all coming to the same conclusion. And we've all got different backgrounds. Some of us are donors, some of us are donor conceived, some of us are both, like yourself. But there appears to be an intentional legislative design here in the United States, and the system is working exactly as it was designed. And we're going to have to get together and challenge this, and challenge the fertility industry as a whole, because they don't want to change. They like the level of control they have now, and they like to have the ability to control whether or not donor conceived people can ever possibly meet their biological fathers or their extended families, for that matter. It's terrible, absolutely terrible.
I think that's so interesting, so cool that you're doing that. Is it true that you were a bank donor at first when you were first a young targeted donor? Were you targeted by the industry?
I was, but not in the traditional sense that I walked into a bank. When I was about your age, probably 20 years ago, I started doing some work for an adult entertainment company, live modeling, and specifically subcontracting for Chippendales. So, fit men up on stage dancing and whatnot, live male entertainment, an all-male review. And what happened was, the internet was in its early stages back then, but somebody in this industry saw the agency I was working for, and they saw my photo, and they picked me out of a lineup and said, that's who we want. And what happened was, I guess the backers and the demand was in Asia at the time. So a Japanese company had sent over a nurse, an extraction nurse, and I got to spend a couple months with her. And then that product was shipped back to Asia for, I guess, sale in Japan, Korea, Singapore, and China. And I was young. I was very young. I was very naive. I really didn't understand how the industry worked at the time. But I never walked into a bank. I never had any intention of getting into it and going that route. But the more I learned on the high end, when it comes to pro athletes or maybe say actors, anybody that has a talent manager, a talent agent, and the longer you stay in Florida, you're going to see a lot of talent agencies, modeling agencies. The high end of this industry works through those talent agencies and talent managers, whether it be, it's for the most part pro athletes, but, like I said, sometimes they're seeking out, guys on film and photos, just talent of all varieties. But what you've got to keep in mind is actors, actresses, models, those people are for sale, and the buyers aren't always the cover of a magazine company. Sometimes they're buying things that aren't necessarily readily available. And I think that's kind of how the fertility industry came about. It came about as a venue to meet a demand that was taboo in most cultural corners. How you can't exactly walk into a doctor's office or your pharmacist and say, what, I think I would like to have a baby today. It's really, in American culture, it's very, very taboo. We're not as open as Europe is. And it probably stems back to the founding of Protestants who left Europe because they held themselves to a higher moral value or moral code, however you want to look at that. And, a lot of people would say, well, Americans, they're kind of prudes. And I suppose underlying, that's part of our subculture, and most of it's subconscious.
Right. Interesting. And how many of those children from Asia have reached out to you by now?
There's been a few, but we've got serious, language boundaries. The Japanese population, less than 1% speak English. So even, communicating with the daughter I've spoken about before, it's a challenge. She wants to learn English and maybe spend some more time over here. But when you travel throughout Asia, and I'm sure you've seen this yourself, it's really not that common to run into a large portion of the Asian population who speaks English. So, unless I learn a lot more Chinese or Korean or Japanese, there's a real language barrier. So the question becomes, what happened 10, 20, 30 years ago where people decided in Asia that they wanted to have Caucasian babies? I don't know. I don't know why that is, because even today there are major language and cultural barriers. And I just don't know that that'll ever change.
Right, absolutely. No, I agree. Well, from donating around the world, what I've seen is that there's still a taboo in most places, most countries. I feel like for lesbian couples, it's easier to reach out to a donor and to come to that conclusion. For single mothers by choice, there's still a heavy burden on them because there's so many voices telling them what they're doing is wrong. Same for lesbian couples, to be honest. And you're right, what you said at the beginning of the call, and I think about this a lot, is what I'm doing now as a donor, or we as open donors are doing, is no different to what our ancestors were doing in the past, except for the fact that most donations are artificial and not so much natural anymore. And the fact that women now make the choice with whom to reproduce, while Genghis Khan, for example, he didn't necessarily ask all the women he reproduced with if they were open to reproducing with him. So I think that an open donor is the modern and almost normal way to fatherhood. I don't think that it's something very, very different to what we've seen in human biology before. It's reproducing on a fairly simple level. I even argue that it's more natural than a regular relationship nowadays that leads to children after a couple of years. I don't believe it's natural for people to be in a relationship for years on contraceptives and then have a kid like 5, 6, 7 years into that relationship. That's unnatural as hell. If you think about all the missed cycles, all the sex that made your limbic system feel good, but that wasn't leading to a child. Now, when you do work with an open donor or a donor, you see someone you want to reproduce with, you make that choice actively and consciously, and then you make those moves towards it. There might be less romance and emotions involved, or no romance involved, which you, of course, have in a relationship, but it still feels more natural to take this path of reproduction than what we are seeing in the collapsing nuclear families of the Western countries. And I think that, and a lot of other donors agree with me, that the future will be held and led by donors.
I completely agree. If modern society and culture here in the West, late stage capitalism, if people aren't having children, then they're only going to be around, a max of maybe 100 years. So that means that moving forward, the future will be comprised of only the people that are reproducing. And the statistics are wild. Right now, something like 46 to 48% of American women are turning age 30 and they're childless. And this has never happened before in history that we know of, unless it happened a million years ago or 500,000 years ago. But what that means at the end of the day, we know for a fact, and this is hard data, that 50% of women who turn 30 without a child will never have a child. And that window typically closes by 38, but for a lot of women, it closes earlier, 34, 35. Anything after 35, we call a geriatric pregnancy medically. So what does that look like moving forward? If 50% of women after 30 can't have a child, and we're approaching 50% of American women or Western women in general, including Europe, not having children by age 30. So that means 25% of women on this planet living in the West are not going to reproduce and pass on their genetics. So we're approaching another genetic bottleneck. And this happened. A lot of geneticists think it happened around 12,000 years ago, which some people think was the deluge, the Great Flood. There's evidence for maybe a comet hitting North America and creating the Great Lakes. Something disastrous happened, and supposedly less than 10,000 humans survived. Now, there's another way to look at it, and that population is based on your genetic variation, and they come up with those numbers because all humans are very, very closely related. All the other human species were destroyed. They were wiped out. Something killed everything else, whether that be a disease or a flood or maybe even just warfare. But you and I are entering that state, and it's weird to look at and think about it this way. And here's how I could best describe it. What if you take all of the most popular donors on the planet and say, you ascribe a number to them, say they each end up with 500 children, and those children each end up with large numbers of children. Moving forward, what we're going to see on this planet is probably similar to what happened 12,000 years ago, because the genetic variation is going to shrink, because, as we've just stated, that 25% of American women are not going to be reproducing. So with that, you immediately cut out 25% of the genetic variation. And that's a wild concept. That's exactly the kind of thing that happened 12,000 years ago. And you just extrapolate that forward, a few hundred years. If you lose 25% of your genetic variation every generation, so every 20 years, every 30 years, it only takes a few hundred years to really shrink and bottleneck. And that's what's going on. And if it wasn't for people like me and you, the population would probably be falling off a cliff right now. I look back at this and I think, for 2025, the United States population is probably going to decrease 2 million people. And that's just wild to think. Okay, so it's 2 million this year. What's it going to be next year? 3 million, 4 million the year after? Obviously, we're deporting illegals, but the baby boomers are dying. They're the largest generation ever. So all the baby boomers are going to be dead within the next 6 years. We deport 28 million illegals, and then if no young people are having children, and we know that 50% of childless women over 30 aren't going to be having kids, the U.S. population is about to go into free fall, which Japan has been in for a couple of years now. They're losing about 1 million people a year, but we're probably looking at 2 million people population decrease in the U.S. just this year. So you and I are headed into uncharted territory, and men like you and I, who have been taboo in the past, are about to be the focus of everyone's attention as Western late-stage capitalism starts collapsing.
Yeah, I agree. Well, reproduction is a game where those that show up win, and everything an open donor is really doing is putting himself out there and saying, I'm open to reproduce. Who wants to reproduce with me? And there's many ways of going about and many different strategies we've seen from donors to do just that. At the end of the day, it's working. They're showing up, they're reproducing, they're having children. And I don't necessarily think that a population decline for other groups and other families is bad for the donor-conceived families. I think I might even think it's the opposite. I come from land investment and land ownership before I became a donor, and what I've seen with land, I mean, it is a limited asset. It's not like cryptocurrency that you can, add more to, or it's not like stocks where the company can just split all the stocks or grow. The amount of land out there is we don't even need regulation. We have a limited amount of land out there, and so what I've seen there was, okay, wow, land ownership and families is going to be the future of humankind, and whoever shows up, he's the one who can then take care of the land and do something with the land. Um, and there's examples in Japan or Italy where you can get a farm for a couple hundred or less, sometimes even for free, because they don't have anyone to take care of it. And they know if it will decay and the house will collapse, then it will lower the land price to even more into the negative, because it's devastated or full of chemicals. So I think it's really one of those things where, and I thought the idea of like the comet 12,000 years ago was interesting, because what we're seeing right now is a bunch of comets hitting us humans in many different ways. We're seeing AI, we're seeing social media, we're seeing contraceptives, like so many things are going in at us. And what open donors are doing is they're staying very focused, and they're saying, okay, guys, like, fuck the distractions. We want to continue to reproduce and create healthy life. Everything else is second for us. Everything else comes second, and it's working, and it's working better than ever before. To be honest, I mean, now men that don't really have desirable traits can be open donors and have 50 children, 100 children, 200 children. It's at least what I've seen in the industry, just by putting themselves out there and just by pushing for that. If those same men had tried to reproduce a couple hundred years ago, no chance, just physically, no chance. No one would have let them reproduce with the women of their own tribe or something like that. So we're really seeing a very interesting drive and a lot of factors coming together that make it harder for the everyday person to have children, and that leaves them with a lot of distractions, while donors can just say, okay, I'm focused on what I want to do and reproduce.
I want to touch on that point you just made about what you would consider desirable men, undesirable men. Let's touch on a historical figure. Napoleon Bonaparte of France. How tall was he? 5'4", 5'5"?
Yeah, he was
He,
man.
well, at the time, I think that was average height in France. The Europeans who showed up in America from Spain, they were typically between 5 foot and 5'5". You got to think Europe was recovering from smallpox at the time. That's what wiped out 99% of Americans. But Napoleon wasn't very tall, but obviously he wielded a lot of power. He was one of the most powerful men on the planet. So what you and I might perceive right now is probably relevant to this time period specifically. Obviously, Americans and Europeans are taller. We like to think that we're taller now than we were back then, but at the time, like I said, Europe was dealing with a lot of diseases that were really hurting people and hurting them genetically. It was impacting their height. The other big factors, starvation. When the Europeans showed up in America, the Europeans were shorter than the Americans because Americans had a healthier diet, they had more nutrition. So they typically grew 6 to 8 inches taller just during adolescence. And Europeans were starving. So Europeans who lived here first and second generation then grew taller living in America. And that's, you think about that, that's really prolific. So as men have gotten taller, women have raised their standards. It's like when a woman gets an education or she gets a high-paying job, her standards for the men she will date or reproduce with then increase. We call it the high heels effect. So, if a woman's 5'5", but oh, sorry, give me 1 second. We got another. We're popping here. Tommy,
Just listening. All good. You can continue. The recording will only be like the person talking.
Excellent. So, when we talk about the high heels effect, let's say the woman's 5'5", she puts on high heels, and all of a sudden she's 5'8", and she says, I'll only date guys 6 inches taller than me. It's like, okay, well, if you're 5'5", you'll date a guy that's 6'1". But if you put on the heels and then you say, I want a guy that's 6 inches taller, are you looking for a guy that's 6'4"? Because even in America, that's less than 1% of the population. That's a very, very small specific subset. And in the donor community, we see some wild stuff. People talk about racism. It is what it is. But when a woman says, I want to have a child, and he's got to have green eyes, she's not going to accept anything else. Or, he's got to have red hair or black hair or whatever it is. He's got to be 7'8" and 12-pack abs and, make $10 million a year. Whatever she says that's her standard. No matter how high that expectation is, that's what she's looking for. And I think right now you and I are living in this just really absurd time, primarily due to the internet and social media, where women don't have local standards, which is pretty much how humanity has always worked. They've got these global standards where they say, I want the tallest, wealthiest man on the planet. It's like, oh, okay, come on, lady. There's 8 billion people. Elon Musk has 13 kids, but is that a realistic expectation? Do you really think you're going to get Musk's attention, and then your kids are going to inherit his wealth? I don't know. I mean, I guess it works for some women, but it's not going to work for 4 billion women. So a lot of that's reasonable standards. But to touch again on your point, how shorter men are reproducing now, I think they always have. And that's how you had somebody like Napoleon Bonaparte pretty controlling most of Europe, and I'm sure he had a lot of children. He's got a lot of descendants out there right now, and he wasn't very tall, but he obviously had some very desirable traits, and he was clearly a very intelligent man. We are all the product of our environment, and that environment's always changing and shifting. And I think maybe Bonaparte is the perfect example of that, and maybe the most prolific donor of his time. And he was maybe 5'4". So I think he might be the key example to your question there. What we're in right now is an environment where social media and the internet have given one man the opportunity to advertise himself to millions of women. And the opposite is true for women, where one woman has the ability to view, millions of men. So she's got to make a decision. So due to hypergamy, they're trying to pick the guy at the very top of Mount Everest, who's 7'8", a billionaire with 12-pack abs. But the chances are that he will select her out of millions of women is, about 0%. So usually what I've noticed is that recipients, by the time they start approaching age 35, reality starts kicking in, and hypergamy wears off, where they realize, like, hey, I'm not 18 years old and a supermodel. I'm 35 years old. This is my last chance to have a child, and better get real. That's usually what I see in the donor community. The women coming to us are getting real, and they're at the very end of their cycle. They're late stage, usually mid-30s. What's your experience with that? What would you say the average age of recipient is that you meet?
Well, there seems to be 4 or 5 different kinds of recipients that reach out to me. There's the lesbian couple, and they can really be across the board, any age, from 20 to late 30s. Then we have single mothers by choice. I think there's a new trend of young women choosing to become single mothers by choice. I'm seeing a lot on TikTok and YouTube, Instagram, where young women decide, like, I want a baby now, I don't want to wait, I have baby cravings, and the men out there who are interested in me, I'm not interested in, or they have mental health issues and would make great biological fathers, so they choose donors instead, which is not always the healthiest route. It seems like the risks of trouble or hostility is fairly high with that group of recipients. Then there is the single mothers by choice in their early to mid 30s. More and more women are actually making the choice to become a single mother by choice in their late 20s as well. I've had a few recipients in the late 20s, really wonderful, kind women reach out to me, say they want siblings. So they're planning ahead, and they know if they make this choice in their mid 30s or late 30s, they might end up with no siblings. So I feel like there's a trend where they say, okay, I want to make this choice now. And there's also what I see growing up without a father myself, right? I didn't grow up without a dad. My donor was, when I was 15, he became an open donor. And it was a rough childhood. My mother was a single mother by choice. She was 35. The men that she wanted didn't want her. The men that wanted her, she didn't want. Right? Like a almost normal kind of story for a single mother by choice. She decided to choose the very best donor mind, and I'm very happy about that because to me, I was lucky having a super healthy donor who was, only organic and no alcohol, no cigarettes, no drugs, none of that, which is very, if you look at the regular man's sperm nowadays, it's already passing on a bad foundation, no matter the assets he owns. If my father was a trillionaire, but I would receive the genetics of what Elon Musk looks like his body, I would be sad. I would rather have a poor father who has healthy genes. I'm a very much like health and family first kind of person. I know assets, there's a lot you can do with assets, but it's hard to buy family and it's hard to buy health with money. Those are two things that are passed on and that you work on daily and all the time, which is also why I think the first most valuable donors will be those with the strongest and healthiest network of half siblings for the recipient's children. Because I had 21 half siblings, was great having this network. I could travel for free. I have connections into different organizations and companies because of them, of course, on like a small scale level, so nothing crazy. But what I'm trying to set up my own biological children with is really incredible opportunities when it comes to traveling, when it comes to business, when it comes to cultures and all that stuff that comes with having blood friends by blood in other countries. But yeah, getting back to your question, the kind of recipients, and then we have the recipients with infertile husbands as well, and the recipients with trans fathers, so where there's a father who used to be female or is a trans male. And in those cases, I have the highest respect for the men that decide they want to grow a family, even though they cannot do it themselves biologically and naturally. Those men I see as my brothers. When I work with those families, I really try to make sure that they see how much I respect them. And for me, this is not about, okay, like I will get your wife pregnant. This is so cool or something like that. To me, this is really, they are doing something wonderful. They're doing something great. If I was not fertile, if I had low sperm count or bad sperm quality, and I would still want to have my own family, I would most definitely adopt children or work with a donor myself, to be honest. So I respect that. And those are basically the main groups of recipients that I work with. So it's really a spectrum, I feel like. And what I'm seeing a lot is that donors like to pick out the women that they're kind of upset with because their standards are very high, or because they get hostile or are toxic. It's nice and easy to focus on that because it drafts attention, but I really try to circumvent that. And it works fairly well because I charge my recipients, and I see myself as a professional donor, and whoever can't pay my fees and whoever doesn't understand this professionalism, I don't work with. And that makes it fairly easy to have recipients work with me that respect my work and that say, okay, we respect your work, it's worth paying for that, and it's a different kind of relationship than if I went into a more, what happens sometimes between donors and recipients, kind of emotional, maybe a tiny bit romantic kind of relationship that some men have. And I think we men, of course, we have this drive, if there's a good looking, attractive single mother by choice, to go into that. But I think it leads to a lot of issues on the other end.
When you go that route, you've got to have strict limits. It's you can't ever have a situation, where you're at your house and two women show up at once. You don't want to be in that situation. In America, everybody's got guns. Don't do that. Go to her house. Don't bring her to your house, because once two or three of them know where you live, they'll all show up at the same time, and that's when things get dangerous.
Has something like that happened to you before? Because it seems like with your posts, you're kind of sometimes making yourself look you don't just portray yourself as a donor, but also as a high value, good looking man. So you're probably attracting a kind of recipient with that kind of outreach.
I try. Well, one of the things I try to do is I try not to have children with women that I'm not attracted to or I'm not, agreeable with. Like if I can't sit down and have dinner with her, or, spend a couple nights together, go on vacation, go hit the beach or go boating or whatever. If I can't spend time with her, like we can't socially connect, or I can't fly over to Japan and spend a week or two with my daughter and her mother. I try not to have children with those women, because what I've noticed is that if I wouldn't enjoy being around this woman, why would my child? Maybe she's not fit out, for raising children. Maybe she's not sociable. There are women that are insociable and they just can't be around anybody. They can't live with other men, and some of them probably shouldn't be having children. Every donor I've ever spoken to that's ever had to file for custody has never taken custody from the mother. They've had to file for custody because they're being litigated by the state after the state has taken custody. So usually, like, the mother ODs or she goes to prison, the state takes custody. The state takes the children, puts them in foster care. Then the state litigates the donor for state child support. So the donor litigates for full custody, at which point then the state has to pay the donor as a single parent. But I've spoken with multiple donors, and they've not wanted custody, but they weren't going to let their children live in the foster system, particularly in some big city states like Chicago or New York or Atlanta. They don't want their children in those foster care systems.
Would you agree it's the lack of screening involved there as well?
Right. Well, that's on the donor. Like I said, I really just try to have children with women that I can sit down and have a date with. We can spend some time with, and I try to maintain those relationships.
For you, does it have to be romantic for you in order to work as a donor, or can it just be a good friendship and an artificial insemination?
Oh God, we just friends most of the time. I've got children with multiple lesbian couples. They're not attracted to men. They don't want anything to do with us. They've got their own thing going on. That's cool, and we can still be best friends. I mean, there's some women I get out and ride around motorcycles with. Two chicks on a bike. I'm cool with that. Men like us get to meet a lot of women. You only need so many romantic relationships. And something I try to remind a lot of recipients is that your donor probably has a wife, a girlfriend. He's probably got his own kids at home. He's not looking for a new wife. Your donor is not your husband. And I tell women this all the time, and a lot of them get confused. They're like, oh, I'm going to fall for child support. It's like, your donor is not your husband. He's got his own family and kids. He's just the donor. He's the guy you're attracted to. He's willing to help you, but you're not legally getting married to this guy. There should be no expectation of support. And that's where things get kind of weird in U.S. law, because you can't sue an anonymous donor from a fertility clinic for child support. So why can you sue a known donor for child support? That's where it doesn't make any sense. And it really gives the clinics all the power and control, because if you took that away from them and known donors had federal legal protection in the U.S., I think the clinics would probably evaporate overnight, because then every guy who wants to do this can be a known donor without legal repercussion. What would be to stop, say, Tom Brady from going on a date with a different woman every night if there were no legal repercussions? And the women do this. Would they do it if they couldn't go after Tom Brady's fortune? So what that would do is it would kind of take the hypergamy out of it. There wouldn't be any gold diggers trying to go on dates with Tom Brady if they couldn't get the child support. Once you take the money out of it, then you can have true, good, and pure intentions. The only women that would be dating him would be dating him because they found him attractive, not because they want his fortune. And the same deal with Elon Musk. The only women who would have children with Elon Musk are women that are attracted to, as you mentioned, Musk's build, which, if he would get off the ketamine and go to the gym every day, he could be an attractive built guy. He just doesn't want to do that. I don't know. I'll never understand it. I'm at the gym 2 hours every day, but I think primarily, with wealthy guys, the women that pursue them are women pursuing money. It's gold diggers. If you give these guys legal protection, if you just get rid of all the support and litigation outside of marriage, all this will go away. I'm sure the birth rates will plummet, just drop off a cliff. But I just don't see how the fertility industry can even exist if you legalize known donorship and offer known donors legal protection. I don't think the fertility industry would exist. And it's a $9 billion industry, so they hold a lot of power in this.
Absolutely, I agree. Well, it's one of the regular business things, and one of the things I tell all donors in the Open Donor Association is, they charge their recipients so they can spend a lot of money on their leads. right? The more you charge, the more you can spend on your clients, the more you can spend on your business. Most open donors, they do it for their legacy, so they want to have biological children, so they won't charge as much as a clinic would charge their recipients, right? Now, that's also why I decided to found the Open Donor Association, because I thought we need a place where open donors can get together, talk about their issues, someday get into policy making as well, to make sure that things change around here. And I'm already doing that in ways where I offer them the education that they need to see how can I mitigate the risk of child support as much as possible. And of course, men that are multimillionaires and billionaires, they don't want to hear anything about a mitigation of risk. They want to delete that risk, because for them, even a small risk is too much if they are, potentially might lose millions. Now, in my case, what I did, because I was taxed to death in Germany. I don't know if you know, in Germany is like 47% tax
Oh,
on
yeah.
income. Yeah. The highest tax bracket is like 47% on income, 19%
Yeah.
sales tax. So you pay 20% on everything, basically. It's nasty. It's stupid. It's disgusting. It's socialist. But what I learned there was, if you want to be independent, if you want to be a man moving on his own path, then you can't be stuck in a system like that, which is why I made sure I get my Canadian passport as well. So now I have 3 passports, which is why I made sure to not open any business in Germany anymore, close it down, move away, move my center of life to different places as a traveling donor, which has led to me to a position where it would be hard, really, really hard to sue me if possible at all, because the question would be, are there any assets under his name? Where would the assets be? In which country would the business be? All these questions, which recipients, they don't really want to go through if they ever have an issue. And I tell my recipients, hey, if you do have an issue with the child, psychologically, mentally, emotionally, financially, you can talk to me, and there will be a way we can figure this out. I know another donor in the Open Donor Association. He does it similarly. He's something like a life coach for his recipients as well, and it works really well, because usually nowadays, especially when it comes to money, it's not an issue about surviving and protection anymore. We all can survive and eat and be protected. It's more mental health or physical health that keeps us from doing the things we need to do, to make sure these basics, these things like survival and protection, are met. If you are somewhat healthy mentally and physically, it's really not hard to feed yourself and to to take care of yourself, if you don't waste all our time with the wrong things. So yeah, there's a lot we're trying to do in the Open Donor Association, to put the word out there more, and to train donors into making the right decisions early on, because, as you know, I mean, you yourself, you probably would say doing that with the banks in Asia might have been something you wouldn't do again, or probably wouldn't do again the way you did it, because you didn't know what was going on. And now you might have, is it true, multiple hundred of children in Asia, or is that just an estimate?
When you're young, when you're like 20 years old, you never think that you never think you're going to have like 400 or 500 kids. It's just not a thought that exists in your mind. And 20 years ago, there was, the internet wasn't what it is today, but there was never any evidence or talk of men having hundreds of children. You had to go back through history and look at Genghis Khan or European royalty to see something like that. What's going on right now has not happened for hundreds of years, and it puts you and I in a very, very unique historical perspective, because moving forward, hundreds of years from now, thousands of years from now, people are going to look back through our genetic history, and they're going to point at us, and they're going to say, that handful of men right there changed the face of the planet. And hopefully it's for the best. I would like to think that what we're doing is a very smart thing to do. And obviously the women find us attractive. They know we're intelligent, wealthy, successful men. Hopefully our children are wealthy, intelligent, and successful. You mentioned real estate. I don't see any reason that our children or grandchildren won't be selling real estate on Europa and Mars. And so I really think that moving forward, humanity is going to be an interplanetary species. And I think Musk might be right about this. He's got at least 13 known children. It's hard to say how many children he's got that are unknown, but you've got intelligent men having lots of children right now, and humanity might be about to go, interstellar. We might be about to take a big leap. You and I might be the last generation stuck on this planet.
Mm.
Things might be about to get wild. So in the moving forward, looking back historically, 300 years from now, they might say those couple of guys changed everything, because all of a sudden, there were all these babies born that were highly intelligent, highly successful, and that's what helped propel humanity to the stars. I mean, obviously, Elon Musk's father, whether you like the guy or not, he did an amazing thing by giving birth to a son, with his wife, with Musk's mother. But he's turned out to be an extraordinary individual, and it's going to change how humanity moves forward. I really think we're at the precipice of a genetic bottleneck. I really do, because as we've already mentioned twice, 50% of Western women are childless at age 30, or 48%. And we know that 50% of women after age 30, they're not having kids. So moving forward, what humanity is going to look like is the people that are having the kids. Right now, the people that are having the kids, as you mentioned, are people who are intentionally doing it. There's really no more accidental births. Birth control, you can buy it off the counter. You don't have to get a prescription. You've got chemical abortion. You've got abortions legal in most states still. More humans have been aborted, killed in the womb before they were even born, than have ever died in war throughout all of human history. I believe it's 1.4 billion now. So 1.4 billion humans. That was the total population of the planet 125 years ago. So in the year 1900, there was only 1.4 billion humans. That many humans have been executed before they were born in the last 125 years. That's extraordinary. So I don't think we're having any more accidental births, any more accidental humans. The women that are giving birth today are the women who intentionally want to, and the men that are having children, like you and I, are the men who intentionally want to carry on humanity and maybe produce the best, brightest people we'll ever have. In the past, if everyone was having children, you had all these accidental births, and a lot of people who were having children in the past probably didn't want to have children, and they didn't make great parents. Maybe they hated their kids and hated their spouse. I don't hate any of my children. I love children. I love women and children, which I think I touched on earlier. I try to have children with women I can socially be around, and typically women I find attractive, and beautiful kids. It works out good. You've just got to set some boundaries. You mentioned that a lot of the women that you've run across, they're single mothers by choice because of hypergamy. They've got standards that are so unrealistic that they'll never be met, and they start to realize this at around age 30, around age 35. They understand, like, okay, I'm a successful woman, but for some reason I'm not attracting the successful man I want. And I run another show called How to Date American Men. And basically the whole show, I just try to explain to women, look, attractive, successful men want young women, 18, 19, 20. Leonardo DiCaprio doesn't date women over age 25. Men want young women. They don't want women that are 35 and 40 that have money. Successful men already have money. They'll date the girl working the fast food restaurant that's 19 years old. You want young, attractive, physically fit women. It's not about the money for successful. Now a guy who doesn't have any money, that's financially destitute, yeah, he probably doesn't want to ship her, but he's looking for a cougar. But, women in their 40s probably aren't going to be having kids anyways. They probably missed that boat between 35 and 38. Do you think hypergamy is playing into this, where social media has just brainwashed billions of women into believing that they're all going to get married to Tom Brady and Elon Musk?
Well, I think the sexual marketplace has collapsed. I think the sexual marketplace has collapsed for many different reasons. One, the reasons you just mentioned, but also because we have to see the other side as well. It's easy for us to kind of point at women, but I feel like we men, we expect sex to be so incredibly cheap and convenient. And a lot of women are not willing to give it up that cheap. And so that's why people are not having sex anymore in the generations of myself and younger. They're having less and less sex even. right? They're choosing not to do at all because men are saying, well, why should I put in the effort if I can just watch a porn? And then we'll have sex robots. So sex robots are going to wipe out a whole nother part of men. It's going to, the genetic variation is going to be much even smaller because then you don't even, you get the physical intimacy on top of the pornography. So sex has gotten incredibly cheap. There's prostitutes, even in Germany, you can go have a prostitute for $35, $40 from Romania. You can have prostitutes in Thailand for like $20 and all that. And then you have the women on the other side saying, like, I don't want to give myself up for this kind of little amount of effort that the men are putting into having sex. And so the sexual marketplace seems to have a collapse, and I think the reproductive marketplace is where the future is at. And people don't talk about reproductive marketplace. They don't talk about reproductive marketplace value. They don't talk about all these things that are going to make up the next generation. The future is intentional fatherhood, motherhood, donorship. It's intentional reproduction. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, once you remove all the accidental pregnancies, which is probably happening right now, there just won't be any more accidental pregnancies. You've got birth control, you've got abortion, you've got pornography, as you mentioned, sex bots. So in the next 10 years, there aren't going to be any more accidental pregnancies. There will only be intentional pregnancies. The population will probably revert back to the 1.4 billion, which is where, it was probably for a very long time, a billion people. That's probably enough. And then we're going to have probably the exportation of humans off the planet. You're going to have humans moving to Mars, moving to Europa, maybe moving to other star systems, other Earth-like planets, Zegama Beach, your paradise in the stars. Things are going to get weird, man. You and I are at the precipice. We're at like the forefront where everything changes. There was no internet when I was born. There was no internet. That's crazy to think about. Like, there were no cell phones. You had to pick up like a rotary phone and, turn the little numbers, and it's changed so much. It was hard to get a fuel injected car back then, with any kind of transistors in it. We had points ignition. Things are about to get real wild, but I think once you take away all the accidental births, you don't have these men and women who hate their children, and you take all the dysfunction out of the society. Moving forward, you can have some very, very successful, very intelligent humans that can build a better world if AI doesn't, try to turn on everybody. Which I own a couple of businesses. Maybe one of them's in the defense industry that's preparing for that, just in case AI does try to turn on us. You and I might have this conversation now over the net, and then we'll talk again in 10 years, and we'll be back in the Stone Age, and you and I will be living in feudalism, which you mentioned you've got a large European family. You're basically living the feudalist dream, as if, your father was a king, a European king, 300 years ago. I don't see any difference. And here's what's wild about this. My father was born in Spain on a NATO Air Force base. So maybe things haven't changed. Maybe I'm just a third generation knight to another European royal family. Who knows these things? I don't know that things have really changed at all. Maybe they're the exact same, and we have a temporary bout of technology, and it really all stems back to oil. If oil hadn't been discovered and gasoline engines developed, we wouldn't have any of this right now. So, when the oil runs out, maybe it'll all go away, and you and I will just revert back to feudalism and riding horses with bows and swords. But fingers crossed, we figure out nuclear fusion and proceed forward to colonize the stars.
That's so interesting. Moving forward, what are your plans as a donor? Are you still actively donating, or is it more?
Oh my God, yes. But I've never done any work. I've never walked into a fertility clinic. Oh my goodness, no, I don't do that. Me and the fertility industry in the United States aren't friends. I wrote a bill about 3 years ago, the Same-Sex Equal Rights Reproduction Act, and the gist of the bill is that it eliminates child support and litigation outside of marriage. So that means that women will stop having children out of wedlock because they can't get child support. It would be a federal protection for known donors. and every other attorney I spoke to, and every way we looked at this, we couldn't find anything in the case law that would protect known donors outside of eliminating litigation and child support outside of marriage. So as long as you limit litigation and child support to marriage, your known donor is not your husband. So I think moving forward, that's the way it's going to have to be. And I looked at this from a judicial federal case law standpoint. And what we ultimately determined was that lesbian women can be just as responsible as heterosexual men when held to the same legal standards. And that's part of the same-sex equal rights part of this Reproduction Act, is if you take married lesbian women and you hold them to the same legal standards and say, okay, you want to marry this woman, you want to have children, if you divorce her, and 7 years is like the average U.S. lesbian divorce. It's about 7 years when the child turns age 5. If you divorce your lesbian wife, you are going to pay child support because the donor is not the husband. So somebody's got to be held accountable. So the only way to hold lesbian women accountable is to enforce child support on them when married. Now, you mentioned that you've got some children with some single mothers by choice. And I think a lot of women, as they approach 30, 35, if they have money, that's the route they go, if they've been financially successful. But, that's a double-edged sword for women, because the more money a woman has, the more successful she is. Women don't date down. They only date up. It's rare they date across. So, if a woman's making $100,000 a year, it's rare that she'll even date a guy that makes $100,000 a year. She wants a guy bringing in $250,000 a year. And that's just the way hypergamy is. It's always been that way. I can't do anything to change that. Maybe our children won't have that. They'll be looking for people that are healthy and physically fit and intelligent. They won't be just chasing gold and silver. I don't know, but
I think the scarcity mindset is very deep and built into us humans, right? The feeling like we need more, we might die if we don't get more, is very deep inside of us, and I wonder if it will leave. I have to remind myself every day, hey, this is about staying healthy and building a strong, healthy family. There's no worry. You don't have to focus on making more money here. That's also why I left the land investment industry, because a good land deal could make 50,000, 100,000, and that could be done in less than a week. And so I realized, wow, okay, so money is just flying around through the universe, and now that we have AI and technology coming up, it's even easier to harvest that energy and to put it into whatever you desire. And so I realized, okay, what do I desire? Health and family is what I desire. And those are two things money can't necessarily buy, except for when you choose a donor, when you make a choice of a donor. That's one of the, you can invest in your health, you can invest in your family, don't get me wrong, but you can't make a big purchase and just buy yourself a lot of health with one purchase, right? You have to work out every day. You have to eat healthy every day. You have to take the supplements and so on. And so I feel like the value we are putting out there as donors, by having a large family that women can attach themselves to and attach their children to, and by having a very healthy setup. So even if a woman is, let's say, 50% healthy and the donor is 99% healthy, that's a much better setup than if she chooses a man who's just as healthy as her, and then the child ends up being 50% healthy. The health foundation of the child is not optimal. And so it's really interesting to talk to you, because you have all these thoughts, and it seems like you're a lot like me as a person. It seems like you're into business, you're into growth. You definitely have European heritage, I can tell that. And it's also, you're probably right with that. A lot of it runs through the genes. My father loved reproducing. He has 6 kids of his own. He's donated for 20 donor conceived children. His father on his grandfather on his mother's side loved reproducing as well. Had like 7 or 8 children too. And my family in Europe and Germany, when I first started being a donor, they were kind of confused, because in history it was more, first you build the wealth, you make money, and then you, or at least the last couple hundred years, first you make a lot of money, and then you build a large family, because being an open donor was not really an option, and you needed a lot of money to have access to a lot of women if you wanted to reproduce with many people, right? And I always try to remind myself and everyone that reproducing is not my main motivation. My main motivation is to set up the children that I help create with the best potential um, foundation, with the best I can do when it comes to their health and to their extended family. Which is why I also sometimes say I think during our lifetime there will be seven-figure donors, like men that charge seven figures and upwards to be a donor. If there wasn't the legal bottleneck right now already, it would already be the case. Tom Brady could already charge seven figures to be a biological father. You know, a super fan from the Patriots, a woman, a single mom, has a lot of money. She just inherited a lot. She inherited a house. She has 5 million on the bank, and then she could buy Tom Brady's sperm for 1 million. It would already be the case. That would already happen if we had a free reproductive market. And free reproductive market is the only true way evolution can roll. It will happen one way or the other. The things will roll this way one way or the other. We're just moving slower than we could because there will be a time where we really will deeply understand, hey, we don't have to worry about survival because we have AI, we have technology, all this stuff is taken care of us. Well, it could also turn on us. You're right about that. But I take the optimistic outlook of it, just like many other things have had really positive effects, like the internet and social media and all that, where people were worried, oh no, the internet is going to be terrible. Now it has negative effects for some people, but other people, they're building a whole legacy based on the internet and all that. So yeah, it's so interesting to talk to you because it seems like you're a little bit like me, but older and more experienced in the industry. It's very cool. I would love to learn more about the work you do outside of being a donor, but of course I understand you have to keep that private because you can't talk about everything because of the situations in the US. And I do the same, I make sure that everyone understands, hey, I won't tell you who owns the assets that I manage. I won't tell you where the business are located. If I do, it will be in a place where you can't go after it. And I remind recipients, if there's a problem, you can talk to me because I don't believe in a future where we have like scarcity issues for children necessarily. We're already seeing that in Europe, where Muslims are moving into Europe and their job is basically fatherhood, right? Because the children make a lot of money from the governments. They get a lot of money and they can pull in more wives and more children. Once they have one passport, once a man has one passport, he can pull in multiple wives and multiple biological children who will all get a passport and who all get a couple €100 every month. It's not a natural setup, but it kind of shows that in a way fatherhood and donorship, or whatever it might be, it's a huge spectrum, of course, between like daddy and anonymous donor. We have a huge spectrum in between that. It will be a legitimate thing to do basically full time, and it has been in the past too. There were people in communities and tribes whose job it was to be the person to grow with the community and the tribe, right? Or to take care of people in different ways than we do nowadays. We don't lead with protection and providing as much anymore as we do with experience and connections and health and those kind of things. Health was a given in the past. I mean, right, you could die every day, but people were healthier while they were alive, and when they weren't sick, they were healthier. Nowadays, most people are sick all the time. So it's definitely interesting, and I think that we should combine our efforts. I think you should join the Open Donor Association so that we can find more ways and tactics and possibilities, connections to get into policy making, because we have to pop that bottleneck. I think because it's the best for the biological children and for future of humanity, not necessarily because I want to reproduce more, but more so because I feel like it will be the best outcome if reproduction became a free market more so again, which it's not in the US. You're right.
You touched on a couple great points there, and I want to ask you a few follow-up questions. What is your opinion if we're ever able to legalize my bill for federal known donor protections? Do you think all donors would prefer to be known donors, or there will still be men that want to be anonymous? They don't want their children to have the ability to contact them.
I would say 80-90% of men would want to be known donors, and there's some donors that I know who are half known, but not fully transparent, right? So I can be fully transparent because I can tell my recipients, hey, I have multiple passports. Business is not in the US. I don't have any assets under my name. So if you want to sue me, go ahead and try. I can say this openly. I can say it loudly. I can be transparent about this, but not every business and not in every situation you can do it the way I do. If you only have one passport and if you work for, let's say, the US government or something like that, then you're fucked. You can't be open about it. So everything would become more known, would become more transparent, would become better and healthier for the children. I know there's voices who think donorship is bad and it's stupid, and it's unnatural. They think the traditional nuclear family is traditional, but it's actually modern. It's actually like a very modern invention that the nuclear family is the norm. Actually is more because it was a way the church could grow and kind of a way church could control humans and men, because it's very easy to control a large group of men if you give every man one woman and they can have sex every evening. Now, we don't need that anymore because a lot of men have pornography and they have everything to be controlled already. They have porn, they have prostitution, they have cheap sex on dating apps or with sex robots soon. So there's not necessarily the need to have nuclear families to grow a society like it was in. I think the nuclear family was first mentioned in the New Testament more as something like normal. I think in the Old Testament you can't even find so much about it. It was more like around 1200, 1300 that became normal. But yeah, I think that more people would become fully open and known, and I think it would be much easier to attract men, because one of the main reasons a lot of men don't want to do it, and not just in the US, also in other countries such as Germany, where if you don't go through the fertility system, you're fucked. You can be fucked, except for you have nothing to lose. And do we want only men to be donors who have nothing to lose? No, we don't. We want men to be donors who are successful, who are healthy, who are strong, who are intelligent, who've built businesses, who are providing value. Now, if you're providing value, then automatically you're making money one way or the other eventually, right? Even if you're building a charity, eventually money will run through your hands and you have something to lose in a way as well. And we want those men to be donors, right? And that's what we want for our children. And that's probably what even donors, like, I don't think in bad and good donors, but I think in better and worse donors, because I believe I would only want to work with donors who, if I was their child, I would be proud of them being my donor. And I would only want to work with donors where if my daughter asked me, hey, I want to find a donor, would I refer this donor to her? So in my opinion, some donors I wouldn't refer to my own daughter, and some donors I wouldn't want to have as my own biological fathers. But even they would probably be happy if their children could be part of a humanity where we have more healthy, open and known donors, which is also why I think a few donors who used to be very mate suppressive start thinking about it more and more and realize, well, this mate suppression is actually a way of fucking myself in the behind. Because at the end of the day, mate suppression is coming back at your own children, and you will be old and you will see the place you created over the course of your lifetime, and you will die in regret, which is the worst hell you can die in. You don't even have to go to hell after death if the last 10 years you're just regretting the choices you made. So mate suppression, one of the things that I'm very annoyed about, because the laws in the US are mate suppressive. The fertility industry is mate suppressive. There's a lot of donors out there in the Facebook groups as admins who are mate suppressing. And all they're doing is they're slowing the process down. They're not changing the course of humanity. I don't believe so. I think nature will find its way and life will prevail. I think they're just making it harder for life to grow. It's like someone shitting on a plant that's trying to become a tree in a way. If that makes sense. It will still grow, and the shit might even, turn into a fertile ground, fertile earth, but it will be harder for the plant to grow at first, and it's just embarrassing to see that. So yeah, I agree. There will be more open and known donors.
Now, when it comes to anonymous donors, there's three people involved. There's the child, there's the recipient mother, and then there's obviously the anonymous donor. And the fourth party would, of course, be the physician who's profiteering from all this, because, that's usually done through a fertility clinic, and there's a lot of money exchange. So there's that capitalistic intervention from the physician who's kind of pushing all this, and paying the attorney who's lobbying DC to not push my bill. But out of those four parties involved, would you say that the child who has to grow up not knowing who their donor father is, or being able to meet their siblings, would you say that they are the person impacted the most, and that maybe that psychological impact is a weight they carry within their entire life?
Absolutely. 100%. I'm lucky that my father became an open and known donor. It was an individual choice, and that's something I carry with me all the time. And my thoughts and my ideas is I like to think and solve problems on an individual level, then in a little community, and then in a movement. So I think it's really nice that you're trying to introduce a bill and change something on a federal level. But what I'm doing with the Open Donor Association is kind of from down low, from beneath, telling donors, here are options to protect yourself from child support without a contract. Here are other ways to mitigate that risk, to minimize the risk, setting them up with profiles and pages that are half anonymous. Some donors, they pay me to basically be like an agent for them, or the agency for them. So I do outreach for them. I set up the content. We have like a lead funnel where recipients can reach out to us, and the other way around, that donors can join us and do that as well. And I think by doing that from both directions, probably even, it kind of will drain the money from the fertility industry, because it's already very competitive. It's already like who's the cheapest, who can like offer a cheaper sperm. At the end of the day, a healthy baby is it can't get much better than that. You have a healthy baby and you have a great biological father. I think on an individual level, it can keep getting better and better and better, right? Your donor can be the president of the United States. Your donor can be like a billionaire. Your donor can have like a network of half siblings that's like 500 healthy half siblings. So on an individual level, it kind of can get better and better and better. But fertility clinics are limited, and that's where they're going to collapse. I think it's going to happen one way or the other. Eventually, I think we've seen that in many other industries, like the cab industry moving over to Uber and other like platforms. And I think it's going to be similar in the reproductive and fertility industry as well. Now, what we're seeing with reproduction, and we're also seeing that sometimes maybe in like pornography or prostitution, is that industries that are kind of yucky and nasty and not a lot of people working in and on it, they're just slower to follow up. Right? Facebook will change its digital systems when something new comes up much faster than the local sewage facility, because the local sewage facility, there's just less people working on it. That might not be a great comparison. I think I've made better comparisons in my life, but what I'm trying to say is that as the movement grows and there's more and more donors there will also be faster, and better alternatives to the fertility clinic. So eventually, I think that the babies, they will prevail. They will win. Life will survive, and life will win. You can just be part of the winning side as an individual. You can choose to be part of the winning side, or you can choose to be part of the health side, the hellish side.
You mentioned price there for a second, and I want to poke fun at Seattle Sperm Bank a little bit. I want to say their average base rate is $1,300 per 3% sample, which, if you extrapolate that out times 33, what is that, $42,000, $43,000, somewhere around there. So, if the physician tax on an $800 IVF service charge, you're looking at $2,100 an appointment, or multiply that by 33. What is that, like $69,000 per load from a donor? So let's just say that the base rate appointment is $2,100 a month, for a lesbian couple to go in there and they get the IVF. $2,100 a month, 12 months of the year. So $25,000 a year easily. What kind of dollar amount would you attach to the value of, say, a single mother or a lesbian couple being able to provide their child with the ability to meet the donor father, and maybe even meet him, multiple times a year, get to spend some time with him, even if it's a short window, say 4 times a year? Could you even put a price on that? Or is that priceless? Is that worth millions of dollars?
It's worth every last penny. The best reproductive option is worth all the money a mother has. And I know we have the scarcity mindset, and there's this idea of like, oh, we have to like have money for the baby and all. I think the baby, will receive what it needs. Now, the I will be in the future. I will be criticized. I know this already because I'm the most expensive open known donor you can work with as of now. If you do a cross continental trip with me, and you want me to travel to your continent, prioritize you, it can be up to $20,000, and this already has happened before that this comes up. I have to cancel 2 or 3 local recipients, and so I wouldn't want to do it. I wouldn't do it if it wasn't for this price. Now, the difference between me charging $20,000 then compared to a fertility clinic charging 20,000 over the course of multiple cycles or whatever is that the fertility clinic spends its money on personnel, on lobbying, on marketing, on so many things, right? It spends its money on a lot of things that at the end of the day don't help your child in the outcome, right? Now, what I do as an open and known donor, my recipients know that as well. I don't drive fancy cars. I don't buy branded clothing. This is the most expensive clothing I own is this one suit, right? I don't need a lot of fancy stuff. I don't even know what people spend their money on. Like, it's crazy to me to think about people spending their money on things that are not their health and their family. And health and family, who would have thought, are two things that you can't just take 10K and be like, today I'm going to spend 10K on my health. Like, what are you going to buy with 10K on your health? If you just sit around all day, that 10K is not going to do anything for your health. Of course, if there's like an emergency and stuff there, you need surgery. That's a different situation. But the general day to day, you can't take 10K or 20K that I couldn't spend that on health. So what do I spend it on? I spend it on a stronger extended family for this one recipient as well, and every other child involved too. So this recipient knows that 20,000 is invested in more health for the donor for future children, but also in a strong extended family network for this own child, which is why, again, I think open and known donors will be in the 7, 8, 9 figures over time. It's just a matter of time. And we would already have this if we didn't have mate suppression and reproductive suppression in laws already. And I understand why these laws evolve. It's not like bad people, this and that. And I understand why the fertility industry is a big industry. And for them, of course, if the fertility doctor makes a lot of money, that's nice and cool. But I think that the fertility market is very, very competitive, right? I think I don't think it's as profitable as it might seem. It does take a hurdle to get it to the market, but basically anyone with enough money can say, hey, I want to start a sperm bank. If you have enough money, you can go ahead and do it. So it's just like any other kind of business, like opening a liquor store. It might be profitable for a while. You need some money to get the right papers and whatever that you can open your liquor store. There might be ups and downs. There's hassle with it. It's a business model like many other business models from the 20th and early 21st century. But I think in the future, what will prevail is business models around health and around family. And I think open and known donors are doing just that. And a lot of OG donors, and you're one of the OG donors, but a lot of the OG donors, they are catching on to that as well. I've seen Kyle go from healthy donor to, I have all this supplement stack and I do all these things, and this is also important. I pass on my passport, which is another huge thing for open known donor, right? You pay 40,000 if you want a passport from another country. If you go through the black market marriage market, which is illegal. Now with a donor, you can do it legally. You can get a passport legally. So there's just 3 passports are about 100,000, 120,000 if you have a donor with 3 passports. Just 1 passport goes, and I don't charge that. I pass that on to the children once they're 18, and they can waive their inheritance rights. In Germany, they can do it. I don't know about the US, but in Germany, they can waive their inheritance rights, and then they can get the passport. So there's so much to it where people are catching on and people are starting to understand. What we're doing is we're just leading the path, and I hope that some of my biological children will see this work that I do, which is also one of the big reasons I put out all this content. It's not because I want to go viral, it's because I want my future biological children to see this, watch this, think about it, and understand that, okay, like he walked some path for us already, so they can follow up in this kind of path that I'm walking.
So essentially, there's no price tag you can put on the ability, for a mother to take her child to meet the father. Like that is priceless.
It is priceless. And even in marriage,
It's
you're
priceless.
not getting a guarantee. With an open donor, a professional donor, you can get a guarantee. He can give
That's
you.
that's the only way. There is no other option.
No, in marriage, 50% of marriages end in divorce, and then it's hard to, of those, maybe, I don't know, half of those, of the divorces, you might never meet the father, or not be able to see the father as much anymore, or the mother moves far away from the father, which happened to my father in his first marriage. And I'm very lucky that I saw my father in like all different sorts of situations as a donor, just being super lucky that he has biological offspring, making a funny choice in his early 20s, then as a divorcee, divorced husband, with his wife, first wife. She moved away. The kids are now with her. He's seeing them very rarely, which is like, okay, he put in all this effort, and now he's basically a donor to them in a way. I mean, he's not a dad. He's not a regular stay-at-home dad with them anymore. And now he has his second wife, and he has lots of healthy children with her, and a healthy relationship, healthy marriage. And so, it just shows at the end of the day that if you do it professionally with a donor, you do get guarantees that you don't have an emotional and romantic relationships. And it's very interesting that we are seeing this and that we are learning this, because walking through life normally, you wouldn't see this at all. Like every woman I met since I became a donor that I was considering to date or something like that, I always had to basically explain reproduction and extended family all the way from zero. There was rarely any knowledge about these things that we're talking about, but they're so incredibly valuable for the next generation, the children you will be raising.
Would you say that because known donors have the ability to meet their children, and we know that 100% of donor conceived people are going to focus on this, especially in their teen years, they want to meet their donor father, their biological father. It's priceless. You can't put a price tag on it. It's not possible if you use an anonymous donor from a fertility clinic. So, if you were thinking in advance, 10, 15, 20 years, just even a little bit, as a woman, you would realize, like, okay, if I want to do this professionally and address that need for my child, because my child is 100% going to want to meet their biological father, donor, and probably their siblings, then that means the professional route is the known donor. The professional route is not the clinics. The clinics are the decision somebody makes after they've been out all night drinking. And, it's just a terrible decision, and it's a waste of money. Who needs to pay their 60-year-old fertility physician to buy his 19-year-old secretary there at the clinic a new Mercedes every year? We know what she's doing for him, and we know where your money is going. It's going right into her pocket. Those physicians, that's a private business. They pocket that money. They keep that money. As you said, you and I could open up a fertility clinic tomorrow, and we would both, split the profits. The overhead cost on that is maybe like 8%. It's not a big overhead cost. Every high end
only by money. Sorry to interrupt. We would be incentivized only by money. With open donors, they're incentivized by so much more. But yeah.
Right. I love children and women. I love having family. Some guys don't like it, and those are the guys that moving forward, they're not going to have children. The guys who hate women and hate children, they're not going to have families. In the past, it was different, but 21st century and onward, only the guys who like women and children are going to be having families and reproducing. That's probably the way it should be. We don't need 8 billion humans to function as slaves for the top, elite 1/10 of 1%. A whole bunch of people are about to go away because they're not going to have children. The population is about to go into free fall, and the only people that exist moving forward are going to be descendants of people like you and I, and the women that want to have children to men that are serious about that. So, as I look at it, if I was a woman, I would say going to a clinic and wasting the money on a guy that can never, meet a child, and that she'll never meet. That is not the professional decision. That is the mistake. And every woman I've spoken to who has a child from an anonymous donor, when the child gets to the age in their teens where they start asking, they realize they've made a mistake. Every donor conceived person I've met, spoken to, and interviewed for the book, they've all told me the same thing. They wish they could donor, sit down, even have dinner with them, talk to them, call them up, meet their siblings, It's like the biggest regret of their life, and it hangs over them. And the perfect example is Laura High. Her biological father is a fertility industry physician, and she can't meet him. She knows who he is, but he won't speak to her. And this is the physician. So this is the guy who was pushing this on
And
my
she
generation.
she is traumatized, right? She's like mentally traumatized by that situation.
Yeah, so bad. In fact, she's my age. She's in her late 30s, and she's now pregnant with her first and probably her only child. But she's been trying to speak to her father for years, and he won't speak to her. And this is a fertility physician, meaning he probably has hundreds of children. He won't speak to any of them. That is not the professional route, and women need to hear this. They need to hear Laura's story. And what I've noticed is a change in her tone over the years, where she's come to accept that known donors are the guys who actually want to have children, have
Now,
families.
one question for you though, the posts you've been making in Facebook groups, they don't seem really professional to me though. They seem even more a little bit off turning for this awareness and for this interest that we need in the industry. I know that, there's a lot of sarcasm in those posts as well. But it seems to me that if I was a recipient, I would go into those groups and look for open donors. A post like that would kind of like scare me off and be like, oh, I'd rather, because with an open donor, yes, you're choosing someone with a personality. So you got to handle that. You got to be able to handle that, right? And with an open donor, this personality will be passed on to your child as well. And so with the situation from Laura, before you answer that question, the situation from Laura is interesting because women generally don't want to reproduce with creeps, right? Now, it's a general thing. Every one of us men, though, has a little bit of like, in Germany, we say like a slimy guy inside of him. Like every one of us men has this like this guy inside who can be a little bit like a little creepy or so guy. And going through a clinic is not going to solve that problem. You won't get the perfect man just by not knowing him. At the end of the day, chances are much, much higher that you're getting a creep as the one in Laura's case. There's a creep spectrum with men. There's some men that are barely any creeps, and there's some men that are very heavily creeps. Now, if you go through a clinic, you feel like there's no creepiness involved. You feel like everything's very clean, very smooth, until you realize, well, my child is 50% from someone. He doesn't know the child doesn't know him, which is already creepy. It's already fucking creepy. Like, people are fighting day and night in order to not end up in a situation like this with their husband. They're trying to stick together and trying to not divorce because they don't want to be in a situation where the child cannot be with the father anymore. People stay in terrible relationships because of it for years. And here we go, having the fertility industry make it seem so natural. But yet, to my question, I wonder, don't you think that we as donors have kind of like the responsibility to also put professional, clean, nice, very nice and what's the right word? Content out there, or like, stuff out there?
I try to put a lot of humor on there because women showing up to these groups, it's usually women. They've already been to the clinics. They've already wasted, the typical recipient I meet, she's already wasted between $20,000 and $50,000. She's in her mid-30s, and this is her last chance to have a child. I try to break the ice. I throw a little comedy out there. I would say about 90% of what I post on those groups is simply advising women to 100% of the time meet your donor in person for a date. And I'm not trying to tell women to go on a romantic date. What I'm trying to tell them to do is to stop sending money to scammers in Pakistan, because like it's gotten so bad that I would say 80% of what you see on there is call centers like India and Pakistan. They're scamming women for money, and it's always the same thing: sending money, and I'll send you something in the mail. It just doesn't work that way. That's not how it works at all. And if you think that a business is going to hire an employee without sitting down for an interview, 99% of the time you're mistaken. That's why I tell women, this is the biggest decision you'll ever make. This is bigger than going to college. This is bigger than getting married. This is bigger than buying a house or getting a job. And when you get a job, you're going to go to an interview. So why wouldn't you interview your donor? So you mentioned creepiness. I want to tell all the recipient listeners out there and all the ladies, I found out something really creepy about the fertility clinics. And Laura helped me figure this out.
Have you had
That
an interview with Laura?
no. She doesn't want to talk to me, but she'll come around. I think after her child is born and she understands what I've been saying all these years about how there should only be no donors, and when the child's ready, the child is going to ask to meet the donor. That doesn't mean that, you've got two lesbian women and they're like, oh, we hate them. We don't ever want the child to meet the donor. Okay. The child is still going to make their own decisions. And when they turn 18, if you make the wrong decision, the child will still talking to you, and then they'll still just try to go find the donor. So, like, if you're awful to your child, when they turn 18, they will cut you off. I've spoken with a whole bunch of people in this position. They've had terrible parents. They've had to, just cut them off. But I discovered like the creepiest thing in the world about the fertility clinics, and Laura helped me figure this out. The FDA in the U.S. only has one mandate, and that's STI testing. They're not drug testing the donors. So I pinned that to a map, and guess what I discovered? The facilities where the donors are making their donations, they're usually located in large cities with large homeless populations. So a lot of the donors that are going in there and dropping their load for $100 a pop 3 times a week, they're homeless drug addicts. So that's literally what these women are paying, $2,100 a pop for, is a 3% frozen dead sample from a homeless drug addict. And there's no time limit on this. Some of those samples are 10, 15, and 20 years old. That's crazy. That's a repeat business model. They're not even trying to get the women pregnant. They're just trying to get them to keep coming in every month, dropping $2,100 a month for $25,000 a year. You put 10 of these women on your roster, your clinic's bringing in $250,000 a year. You put 100 of them on your roster, what's that, 2.5 mil? They're using homeless drug addicts. They're not drug testing the donors. This is insane. So you're targeting those lesbian women, and you're like systematically hurting that specific group of people by the child can never meet the father can never pass on wealth and inheritance to the child, and then you're giving these women homeless drug addicts. Like, that's not good genetics. That's the exact opposite of what known donors are advocating for. You're as healthy as an Olympic stallion. I'm at the gym 2 hours a night. Most known donors are very, very healthy athletic men. And all the high-end athlete donors I've spoken to, they all sign a contract for 50% of gross sales. So, like, let's just use Tom Brady as an example. I'm not saying that he's a popular donor in Florida, but let's just use Tom Brady as an example, if you know what I'm saying. So Tom Brady goes in and they're selling his stock for, they're not going to sell it for $1,300. They're going to bump the price up. So let's say $3,200, per 3% sample, let's just say triple the price. So instead of, $42,000, they're selling him for $126,000. Well, he's going to get half of that, half of those gross sales. So what's half of 126? Is that like 70? No. 63,000. Okay. Versus a crackhead off the street for $100 a pop. 63,000 and $100 are two different numbers because they're getting two different products. So the clinic will pay the $100, 3 times a week for the homeless drug addict.
People actually do give 50%. They have these agreements with donors, because I've never heard about those.
Every time I've ever done work, and I've never walked into a clinic, I've signed a contract for 50% of sales. So when I told you, the work I was doing 20 years ago, back when I was doing my modeling for Chippendales, I was working for 50% rate, and that was 20 years ago.
Interesting.
I made some money. I'm not going to lie to you about this. And the extraction nurse they sent to me, she was a high-end Japanese working girl. She was very attractive. We had a very good time together for about 3 months. We were living up at a ski resort, and we were both employed by the Japanese corporation that owned the resort. I had a lovely time. And that just shows you the extreme contrast between the high end, me living at a resort for the winter, skiing every day with this beautiful Japanese girl, versus a crackhead off the street walking into a clinic where they don't even drug test.
Yeah, you're right. What I found is that the FDA does require initial drug testing when they first start, but it doesn't not required before every donation, and that, of course, is the red flag. Now, what I'm seeing about sperm banks nowadays might be different when you donated, is that they use non-negotiable rates for their donors because of the FDA regulations when it comes to how much a donor can receive for sperm donation. So maybe you're talking about agents in that case more so.
What 100%, and that's what I was trying to touch on about an hour ago at the beginning of the show. Every guy in the high end is doing this business through his talent agent and talent agency. And the longer you live here in Florida with me, you're going to start seeing these talent agencies everywhere. And my advice to you with this charity, because this appears to be a charitable organization you've set up. I think Jonathan Jacob Meyer did something similar in the Netherlands. He had a charitable organization set up for his donations. Is that when known donors are working through your charity, the charity works through the talent agencies. And what I'm trying to tell you is that everybody who's serious about this, that is paying money, they're not using the drug addicts at the fertility clinics off the street. They're doing this through talent agencies. Now, whether that be my experience at the resort with the Japanese extraction nurse or stud service. I mean, if you really wanted to get pregnant, you wouldn't use a frozen 3% sample from 20 years ago. You would use a stud service, which is really it's kind of like the majority of what the male review adult entertainment industry is. You know, those Chippendale guys, they're doing more than just dancing on stage. Let me put it that way. You know, women pay top dollar for that kind of thing. And my experience in the years I did it in college was that the majority of our clientele were lesbian women. So when you hear lesbian women say something like, we're not attracted to men, or we don't have heterosexual intercourse, okay, then why do lesbian women, you know, constitute the majority of the business that the Chippendales male review and male dancers are entertaining? Because I assured you, I stayed many a nights with lesbian couples, and stud service is probably how you're going to get pregnant. I want to say that personally, I think the majority of the women in the Facebook groups are lying about how they actually achieve pregnancy. And I've noticed like the craziest thing, when a woman shows up, she says, I absolutely have to have a donor this week. No ifs and or buts, no questions asked. I don't care what he looks like. That's signaling to me that she's already pregnant. She's already pregnant from a heterosexual affair. She's trying to hide it from her wife or husband. So she says, I absolutely have to have a donor this week, because the timing is the only metric she's using.
Oh.
She doesn't care. She doesn't care about the race or the height or anything else. She's just trying to cover up an existing pregnancy. And the longer I do this, the more I see it. You start to see like the games people play. And a lot of it's just games they're playing with their spouse. It has nothing to do with you. I had a weird experience probably 2016, 2017, somewhere around there. And I was actually doing work through what's called the Known Donor Registry, old website from like 15 years ago. But I met a lesbian couple. They reached out to me. I was in Florida at the time, and they were out in like Oregon. They owned a marijuana farm. I'm not going to say any names, but anybody who's been around this a while, they'll know exactly what I'm talking about. These women, they had some money. They flew out to see me from Oregon, came down to Florida. You know, we spent a weekend together, and you know, went on a couple of dinner dates and whatnot. And I thought they were serious. They were like late 30s, early 40s. I thought, okay, this is their last chance. They're serious. They're flying to see me. You know, we'll just do the regular old Chippendale stud service, which, you know, I had some experience with the lesbian couples. And
I mean, what is Chippendale stud service? Because I'm a professional open known donor. I have no idea.
Are you familiar with the Chippendales all male review in Las Vegas? Like the guys up on stage dancing for the women. It's mostly lesbian women.
Male strippers, like in this one movie that everyone knows.
Magic Mike.
Yeah.
Magic Mike. Yep. Yes. Magic Mike. So that's what we're talking about. You know, it's kind of like female strippers. Most female strippers are prostitutes. The men that go there, they're going there to meet the women, and then the women get off work at 2 a.m. and then they go do something else after 2 a.m. after the club closes. That's typically what it is, especially in Vegas. You know, they call it Sin City. You know, people go there and then they fly back with diseases and whatnot. Not really my cup of tea. I'm a very healthy guy. I don't take those risks. But my experience with this lesbian couple from Oregon, this was my eye opener. This was it was almost 10 years ago. But man, it changed the way I view what we see in Facebook, because the Facebook groups are only about 10 years old at the oldest. Most of them are less than 5 years old. But I saw the wildest thing. How much do you know about dominance and submission in the lesbian power dynamic?
I've heard a few different things. What I can see, it's definitely a huge spectrum between lesbian couples who are bisexual, but they prefer to be with a woman because it's more relaxing and they like that more. There's women. My girlfriend just told me there's this woman in her friend group who's like 27 and now she thinks she might be a lesbian. So, it really seems like love comes in many different ways, if I can say it like that. That's what we Gen Zers would say. Love comes in so many different ways. And I've heard that some donors said in some relationships with between two women, one woman is like the leader, and she chooses who is the one to carry the child, and sometimes it might be beneficial for them to have the child themselves if they want it, and then the other woman is basically like the one feeding that mother-child relationship. But again, that's just like extremes that I've heard, and I with my work I don't focus on that too much because I don't want people to like hear about extremes too much to be scared. But I'm still interested in what you experienced there.
I saw a real eye opener, and this is why I try to share this with donors and recipients, because I want them to understand, I want to give back to the community. And I've seen a lot of stuff in 20 years, but this was the moment where I really saw what was going on. They were in town for a couple nights. They got a hotel room. We went out to dinner a couple times. I took them on some motorcycle rides. We went down to the beach. They rented a nice sports car. We had a good time. On their final night in town, we're sitting in their hotel room. We had just had dinner. They were telling me some story. We were laughing and joking around. And just out of the blue, the dominant jumped up and like yelled at the top of her lungs, "Nobody's having sex." And I was stunned because nobody said anything about that. We were just sitting around having a good time, and it was just getting late. I think it was probably midnight. The submissive jumps up and like gets right in her face, and she's like, "Why not?" And this is the part where I'm like, okay, whoa. This has nothing to do with anybody having children or there being a donor, and I shouldn't even be here. And I said, all right, ladies, it's time for me to go. And the submissive like runs out, like I'm going out to jump on the motorcycle to leave, and she's like, "Where are you going?" I was like, I'm not here to have like assist you in your domestic dispute with your dominant partner. And she's speechless because then she realizes what I'm saying. And sometimes you can't see the forest for the trees. You're in the forest. No one had ever explained to her what was going on. So her dominant had spent like $5-6 grand on this trip to bring her there, present me in front of her, and then deny me to her and to not deny her a child. Dude, that is power and control. That is power and control I've never seen before. I've never seen somebody spend $5,000 or $6,000 and then tell another woman, "You're not allowed to have a child, and I am in control of you. I have power over you." Like master and servant, like a slave. It was a power play, the entire thing.
Seems like she was losing power a little bit there, and it seems like it was, was ever the plan to have sex, or I would guess that in that situation she was just worried that it was moving away from artificial insemination to her partner being interested in you.
We had never once talked about artificial insemination. There had never been any mention of it.
What had you guys talked about or agreed about upon, like prior?
They said they were going to fly by and come down here, rent a hotel room, and stay a couple nights, and asked me to enjoy their vacation with them. I was like, yeah, of course. And we had been talking for months. Now, what I found out afterwards was the recipient, she stayed in touch with me after they got home, and she just started cheating on her immediately because she understood what was going on. Her dominant was denying her a child. And this was the first time I really saw this and understood it, but it's not the last time. Now I hear it about once a month. And what typically goes on is that about 7 years into the marriage, by the time the child is age 5, the dominant realizes that she's dating a single mother and she wants to have her own children, and she is not going to raise another woman's child. And it's part of female hypergamy. And dude, it has taken me 20 years to figure this out, but it's like a psychological thing. And if we could maybe get together and talk about this again, invite like a psychologist in or a therapist, I'm 100% sure they're going to agree with on this, because they've seen hundreds of people talk about this. But I ran a poll about this on Reddit, and what I was doing is I was interviewing single mothers to see if they would date single fathers, and then we were just interviewing single women to see if they date single fathers. 90% of women will not date a single father under any circumstances, like 97%. There was only 3% of women that would date a single father. And once I understood that, I understood what hypergamy really is. A woman will not waste her time or resources on another woman's child because she wants to have her own. And this applies even to lesbian relationships. The dominant lesbian is not going to waste her time and resources on her submissive partner's child when she can have her own child. And the longer I saw this, like, it just clicked. I was like, women that can afford to drive sports cars drive sports cars. They don't want to drive minivans. Like you're not going to buy like a used 2012 Nissan Altima when you've got cash to go get a new Corvette. You're just not going to do it because you don't have to. And that's really what it is at the end of the day. Man, the more I saw it, like, it took me 20 years to figure this out. And I hopefully can impart this to the younger generation, because as a donor and a professional donor, it's going to help you navigate what you're seeing. A lot of the women that are coming to us, they haven't thought this out. They haven't thought this through. That's kind of how like the cryo clinics, they function in their business. They get these women to come in here on these last minute terrible decisions and say, okay, here's $2,100, pump me full of a frozen dead load you bought off of a crackhead 6 years ago. That's the fertility industry. Known donors are the professional route. And when you sit down and you talk to the donors who have dozens and hundreds of children, they're going to tell you what to expect. Hey, the child after age 5, they're going to start asking for the father. It's never going to end. It's never going to go away. And chances are, if you're in a lesbian relationship, your partner is going to leave you by the time the child turns 7. When you tell women this, like what to actually expect, because they don't get any of this at the fertility clinic. The physician that owns the cryo clinic doesn't tell these women anything. He just doesn't, he doesn't speak. He just says, hey, give me $2,100. I got your needle right here. Let's see what happens. I mean, she's most likely not going to get pregnant. If you're going to get pregnant, you're going to get pregnant from stud service, a living, breathing, hot-blooded, live in the flesh, known donor.
Explain the stud service idea to me. Is that a real thing in business, or it's just like an idea?
You mentioned that you're traveling. Typically, what'd you say, $10,000 a trip?
A cross-continental trip can cost up to $20,000. A regular trip through the U.S., couple $1,000.
That is typical of what like a Chippendale stud would do. To go out and go on vacation with a woman or 2 women, or maybe even I've got children with a model here in Florida that's married to an older attorney. He's too old to have kids. She wanted to have children. Very beautiful Latin woman from Venezuela. I mean, stunningly beautiful, like a model in Miami, like the capital of Latin America. You'll see her the longer you're in town. You'll see my kids. Stud service, just Chippendale stud service.
They found you through a talent agency, or how did they find you?
Yeah.
Like what kind of talent agency? Like a modeling talent agency or donor agent? Or
Daniel.
Yeah.
Your business, is it legally licensed as a charity in the state of Florida?
Well, I'm only here less than 1 month a year, so I don't necessarily have to do that.
I think that you and I need to get serious about this, and I need to sit down and set up a legal structured framework, whether it be through an LLC, a limited liability company, or we go full, what is it, 501(c) charitable services? Because that's how the
business, it would have to be a charity. Right now, I have 2 businesses in Germany that I'm closing down. And from my traveling, I have 1 business in Panama because I was traveling all the time. But now that I'm staying here for a longer time, I do have to set up another charity here too.
That's how Jonathan Jacob Myers has been doing it over in the Netherlands, the Flying Dutchman, as we call him here. It is a charitable service. It is your it is what it is, but it is a charitable service. You're doing this because you love women and children. We're not the fertility clinics pulling $69,000 off of a single load. And you're also not Tom Brady, or I'm just using him as an example. I'm not saying that Tom Brady is an actual sperm donor, but you're not a high-end athlete, going in there and pulling $63,000, 50% of gross sales from the cryo clinic off of a single load. It is a charitable service. It really is. But what we need to do is we need to set you up with a charity registered here in Florida for this. What you're doing is the stud service that I grew up in that put me through college. Everything you've described to me, $10,000 a trip, a couple $1,000s a trip. And at the end of the day, it is still cheaper for the recipients. Almost every recipient that's ever come to me has already wasted between $20,000 and $50,000 on frozen dead sperm bought from crackheads by a fertility clinic physician. And most of it was 10, 15, and 20 years old. Like they bought this stuff off drug addicts a long time ago. It's been sitting around in their freezers. And the physician doesn't tell the women this. And he doesn't legally have to. He doesn't have to disclose anything. And at most,
it's interesting because my father mentioned to me that he used to like magic mushrooms. Now, luckily, magic mushrooms are not crack, and they actually have a lot of people are now learning that they're actually pretty healthy. Even Brian Johnson, I don't know if you know Brian Johnson, the longevity expert, the guy who is who exchanged his blood for his son's blood and his plasma for his son's plasma and stuff like that. He just did a bunch of magic mushrooms. But it's interesting that you say it because I could imagine him going to a donation after one of his mushroom trips. Maybe that's why I feel so connected to nature every day, and I'm a spiritual person, which I don't think is a bad thing. I think it's beneficial. But it is. You're probably right. If they don't have to check before every single donation, which they should do it. You know, it shouldn't be that expensive to do. Why don't just do it? But I bet that's where they're getting all the cheap sperm that they can sell for much more. And I've seen some pictures of donors that go with the clinics. Recipients have shown me pictures because they have this pay barrier that you have to pay to see pictures of the donors. It's a big part of how they make their money is charging people just to get a look into the page and the profile. With an open donor like myself, you get a full extended portfolio, like 20 pages of information. You get my Instagram, my YouTube, and all that stuff, which is why I don't compare or try to compete with the sperm bank prices. I always say, well, I think I'm the best option out there. I don't want to sound super arrogant about what I do, but I wouldn't do what I do if I felt like I wasn't doing the right thing, right? If I felt like I was, the 100th worst donor or something like that from down the list, I wouldn't be a donor. But they see all that, and then I think that at the end of the day, money is just not so much an issue anymore, and they really understand, and the right women understand. And you're true and right about this too. A lot of women will not give a shit, right? They will want to get pregnant quickly, easily. I just had a call with Anthony yesterday, another donor who's like helped 60 families, and he said most of his recipients, they want it cheap, they want it fast. He doesn't have a genetic carrier testing. He doesn't have any. He doesn't get regular STI, STD tests. He just donates. He's probably safe. His children are healthy, but the recipients that work with me are the kind of people who I want to work with as well, because they do all the research. They know the things you say because they've looked through this for months before they make a choice and talk to me. Of course, I get many recipients who reach out to me, want to work with me. They see my pricing and then they say, "Oh my God, no, this can't be." I've had recipients say, "Well, then I could work with the sperm bank." And then I don't have the time to explain them the whole thing you're explaining right now. I don't have the time to sit down and give them like an hour-long conversation and explain it to them. So I just ask my AI ChatGPT and say, "Hey, give them a good answer so they understand what the fuck's going on." And then they eventually understand, and it changes a lot, and they decide and end up working with an open known donor. It doesn't have to be the most expensive known donor out there, but there's still good options out there who do it for free, do it for less, do it for amounts that the regular person can afford as well. And I support that. I facilitate that, right? I get them together. I help donors become better donors. I help recipients connect to the right donors that are within their budget and they can work with. It is emotional. It is intimate process. Some recipients don't like being declined. Some recipients don't like being told what you're telling me in this video call right now. They don't want to hear it because it's mansplaining, and that's not. But at the end of the day, what we have to get back to our donors all the time is to make sure and understand and have everyone understand we're doing this for the best of the biological children. That's all we really give a fuck about. We don't give a fuck about our feelings. We don't give a fuck about money. We don't give a fuck about any of the regular shit people give a fuck about, that all the other things that are not their biological children. And then you might realize and understand, okay, this is not mansplaining. This is actually setting up the child for the best potential outcome.
Let's try to summarize this into a 5-minute explanation, because it would, like you said, for ChatGPT, try to provide women with like a cover letter and a summary, something to put in the back of the book. So let's bring this down to 5 bulletin points. So let's make this quick, easy, and painless. so most women can understand it. Let's make it very simple. All right. So for a woman to receive a full load, so 33% samples from a fertility clinic, she would have to go 36 months, which is going to cost her, take her 3 years and cost her about $70,000. Okay. So 3 years and $70,000, or she can go on a date with a donor and it can take one night. All right. Have you ever once charged a client $70,000?
Not yet, but there will be a future where donors like myself will charge 7 figures. I'm saying this with full confidence. It might be me, it might be my biological children, might be other donors. There is a future where this will happen earlier or later. But yeah, I like the bullet point. It is true. You can find open and known and healthy donors out there who are better than a sperm bank donor. They don't have to be like the most professional like I'm trying to be. I'm really trying to be the very best. But you can find a good, really good donor for cheap or for nothing, definitely far away from $70,000, who will give you a full load. And he doesn't necessarily have to have a night of sex or intimacy or whatever with you. He might just really be interested in the biological offspring and the extension of his extended family. So yeah, I mean, that's something in simple terms easy to understand, but we also have to have the options, and we have to be out there. We have to push content out there. We have to push presence out there to show this is an option. Every day, this is a statistic you will like or you won't like, but it's interesting. You might mention that in future podcast interviews that you have. Every day, around 40,000 women turn infertile worldwide, and half of those at some point in their life, between 20 and 40, but usually they turn infertile around like late 30s, 40, as you said. Half of those turning infertile wanted a child at some point. So every day, 20 women turn infertile and they wanted a child at some point. This is more than 6 million women who could have just gone with the donor. 6 million baby lives, 6 million potential Elon Musk's, potential Bill Gates, potential Obama's, whatever. 6 million of those every year are lost, even though these women wanted, maybe they wanted siblings, so probably even more than 6 million. And all they need is a good opportunity and a good choice to, a good option. And open and known donors, they can really fill this gap. And I think eventually they will fill this gap, because women will also understand, well, I don't need a man to provide and protect for me. Of course, community is important. That's why some of my recipients, they love the fact that I give half siblings to people locally. So they have a sibling network locally. But yeah, let's get back to your bullet points. First bullet point is if you compare the pricing, and I don't like to be compared on pricing, on basis of pricing. I like to be compared on the basis of value that I offer as a donor. But if you compare on pricing, if you wanted the same amount of sperm from that person directly that donated to a clinic, the crackhead, you might give a crackhead $50. He might jerk off for you. The donor, you might just have to do more work. Crackhead you can find everywhere. A decent donor, you might have to put in some work. You might have to go out there and talk to someone to understand, okay, he's a decent donor. You won't find him easily. It does take work. It does take time to find a good donor, definitely. And I think every day, every month spent, looking for a good one is time spent wisely or well. But yeah, you could just cut out the middleman by putting yourself out there and be an open recipient too. That's what women are not as much willing to do as we men. We are bolder. We have more testosterone. We put ourselves out there. We are open donors. Now, a recipient would never post on our Instagram story, hey, I really want to be a mother. Is there anyone out there in my friend groups who wants to be my donor? Or she might never go into the gym and talk to men at the gym and say, hey, I want to be a mother. You look like a healthy guy. Have you ever considered being an open donor? If you want to, here's my card. We can talk about it. Women don't do it. Men go up to women all the time. Men put themselves out there. Not saying like we are better because of it. It's just the nature of things. So if we talk about it more openly and we make it normal, we normalize it, women will be bolder too, and they will say, okay, fine. I'm open about it. I'm looking for a donor right now. I'm looking for a donor for the rest of my life, maybe, because, who knows? I think there will be a future where donors will be the best men you can find to reproduce with, and they will have the best potential outcomes for the health of your child and the network of your child. But yeah, first point makes sense on a price level. Cut out the middleman. That's the first bullet point, would be cut out the middleman.
Well, and the second half of that, because that's really only one half of it. You can never meet that $70,000 crackhead that was sold to you by the, fertility industry. The cryobanks, you'll never get to meet that $70,000 crackhead. And here's the other wild side of that. A lot of that product is from 10, 15, and 20 years ago.
Every donor is a crackhead. There's a risk that there'll be a crackhead in there. It's of course easy and nice for us to like flag it like that. But to be fair, there's also, I know some donors in the Open Donor Association who are bank donors as well, and they're Open ID bank donors, which is why we accept them. We don't work with donors who used to be anonymous and now want to be open donors, because what recipients value is the full transparency. And also it makes sure that people can't criticize our work, because people come with like incest and like, oh no, because there's 2 stories. If you go through media, I think you can find 2 or 3 stories of half siblings of donors falling in love. Of the millions of half siblings who were created, you find 2 or 3. I mean, that's not a legitimate worry, to be honest. The risks are higher you fall in love with someone who has a terrible genetic disease.
Well, that can only happen through the clinics. That can't happen with known donors, because both of those children know who the father is. Okay, so when that's going to happen, it's going to happen because there's an anonymous donor. And the other side of that is the clinics, they don't dispose of the product once that crackhead donor dies. So if he ODs on the street, they're still selling his product 10, 15, and 20 years later. They don't throw it out just because he's dead, and they don't even know he's dead. They don't like keep tabs on us and be like, hey, Daniel, this is Dr. Moyer. Are you still alive, or did you OD last week? Like, they have no idea. So you might walk into a clinic, buy a product that is from like a crackhead who died 15 years ago on the street. Like, you don't even know what you're buying. There's no possibility the child is ever going to meet the father. He doesn't know who his siblings are. His high school crush could be his sister. That's the reality.
It's the reality. It's a risk, and it's true. And I think, fertility clinics don't put it on their website. They don't say the risk. Just like when you buy cigarettes, you have in Europe, you have this like warning, you might get cancer from this. Should be something like that on the fertility clinic websites, probably too.
But warning, Surgeon General's warning, risk of incest.
We also have donors arguing that it's a part of natural selection what kind of choice the women make. If the better choice they make, the higher the chance of their child reproducing themselves too. So it's also, in a way, just like when women choose a terrible partner or a terrible donor, there's also a lot of terrible open and known donors, unhealthy, mate suppressive, antisocial, mental health issues. There's this one donor, you might know him, Andrew Ryan. When I came into his Facebook groups, he owns like one Facebook group. He kicked me out right away because I looked similar to him, and he saw me as a competition. And now he kicks out every ODA donor, every Open Donor Association donor, and because he dislikes me and because I called him out for this mate suppressive behavior. And you might end up with a donor like that, who's like antisocial and who has a bad network, bad reputation in the industry. So eventually it's natural selection what the mothers are doing in their choices too, right? They're naturally selecting the chances or the risks of their child being a confident, healthy person that wants to reproduce too. And I remind my recipients of that as well. I say, well, I know you have baby cravings. That's why you're here. But the bigger picture is to raise children who want to have grandchildren, because right now you want babies, but eventually you want a healthy and strong and large family when you're old, and look back on a life you would want to do again and you wouldn't regret.
You mentioned something funny there. You talked about donor competition. I was in an interview probably a year and a half ago, and somebody asked me, they said, don't you feel like you're competing against Jonathan Jacob Meyer and Kyle Gordy? And I said, no, absolutely not. The chances are that my sons will end up dating or getting married to Kyle's daughters or John Jack's daughters. Like, that's actually highly likely, because there's only a couple men on the planet that are having hundreds of children. So the chances are that we're like the grandparents. Like, you and I are like the grandfathers right now, and our kids are going to intermarry. That's actually extremely likely, because all the other men who aren't reproducing, they're not going to have grandkids. So what I'm trying to tell you right now, Daniel, is that more than likely, not only are you and I related, 4 generations back through European history, because we look awfully similar. I mean, you and I share a lot of the same features. We're probably like third removed cousins. The chances are that our grandchildren will intermarry is highly likely because our competition is not going to exist. They're not reproducing. So you and I are reproducing, and
Yeah,
our
I don't.
children are going to reproduce.
For me, it's a pure group project. Reproduction of humans has always been a group project, and it is a group project.
We're not competition. You and I are most likely family, and Kyle will be my family, and Jean-Jacques will be our family because our children are going to intermarry, and it may not even be here on the Earth. It may be on Europa, Titan, Mars, or Zeta Reticuli and Alpha Centauri. We don't know what technology is about to do, but we both know that CERN's upgrading the Large Hadron Collider in Switzerland, and it's going to come online in about 5 years. And if it produces microsingularities that can generate gravity, we're going interstellar. Once you generate your own gravity, you don't need rocket fuel. You can build a UFO that works off electricity and can travel with the speed of light. It can bend space-time. It can bend time and space. All things will become possible instantaneously.
Yeah,
the moment the first time machine's built, it always existed.
I'm just reproducing here. I don't know. I don't know any about that stuff.
There's a good chance that our children will be the only humans in the future, because as far as I can tell, I haven't spoken with anybody outside of our community that has more than 4 children. So just statistically, we are the future.
We're having less children as well. So it might not be next generation or our grandchildren, but eventually in 3,000.
3 generations. Yeah.
I don't know 3 generations, but a couple generations, maybe a couple hundreds, or maybe 1,000, 2,000 years from now, the only people reproducing will be open donors. That's what I truly believe. And I might have gone down a rabbit hole, but every other open donor is saying the same thing. So either we all are crazy, or we all see something that the regular person who has 1 or 2 children, basically not stable reproduction rate, is not seeing. But it's just numbers, it's just math, to be honest. What you're saying is just math. I think you might be a bit too enthusiastic when you say 2 or 3 generations, because there's still 8 billion people. But eventually, what you're saying is right. If we don't just pass on the genes, but also the culture of what we do as donors to the children, if they are motivated to reproduce, and that's going to be very interesting. Are donor-conceived children going to have a fertility rate that's higher than 2 or lower than 2? And I think if you're a good donor, if you're doing it right, and if you're really a proper donor, your children will say, I want to be a donor as well, because my dad, he was bawling, he was rolling with it. I want to do something. And now if you are doing it like unreasonable, like ethically wrong, and you're making mistakes, and you're like fucking recipients over and leaving them traumatized, and your children and all that, then I don't think that the children of these donors will have a reasonable reproduction rate, which is why I might not agree with you thinking that every donor who has 100 kids now will also be family for our great grandchildren. I think there's different types of donors, and I think there's donors who are numbers maxing, and I think there's some who are actually quality maxing and reproduction, truly helping, setting something up for the future children to reproduce on a good scale as well. And I hope some of the biological offspring I help produce become donors too. I do so because I believe what I'm doing is great. It's wonderful. It's fun. It's cool. It's just amazing. I'm so lucky that I'm in this position. I think some of the donor-conceived children will see, okay, wow, I have, let's say, 50 half siblings around the world. I have a great network, and these recipients I work with, they're usually doctors or professors or police officers, or work in the government, so that they have an interesting kind of status compared to the regular recipient who cannot pay the fees that I charge as an open and known donor. And I have responsibility towards the other recipients to make sure the new recipients keep getting better and better when it comes to the quality of their adding to the extended family network. And it might not be the right thing for every recipient. Some people might say, oh, I don't care about the half siblings, but then they don't have to work with me. I can refer them to another donor in the network as well, who's, not a full-time professional donor maxing his work. But yeah, overall, I agree. The right donors, the right men, the healthiest and the best donors, they will make up the future population. But I wouldn't put that stamp on every donor. I think there's going to be very different outcomes for different donors. Even if 2 donors both have 100 children, that doesn't mean they will both have 500 grandchildren. It could mean one has 50 grandchildren, the other has 500 grandchildren. It really depends on the culture and the way they work.
Would you say that it is extremely likely that you and I are both descendants of large European royal families? You know, so many generations back, a few hundred years.
I know I am. I know my great grandfather. He was one of the top, I don't know, royal, but generals in the army of Napoleon. So he had like one of these fancy French horses, and if you see the paintings, it looks like everyone had a horse, but actually only a French horse was very expensive. Like a healthy, strong French horse, it's like a Ferrari basically. So he was driving into Russia with his Ferrari on um, stud horse, and on the way to Russia, he made the decision. All the other generals didn't want to do it. He decided to trade his French horse for a Russian horse that was cheaper and like slower and all that, but it survived the winter. So he had a horse carry him all the way to Moscow. I think of these 600,000 men, only 30,000 survived. So only like 5% made it back. And because he made this decision, he traded his horse, which sounded like a stupid decision. Everyone was like, "That's embarrassing. Why are you trading your French horse for a Russian horse, you idiot?" He traded that horse, and I think I'm not 100% sure, but I believe he traded it for multiple Russian horses. So other men in his group that he was moving with had horses as well, so they survived, and the chance of his survival was higher as well because they owed him something. And then on the way back, that horse was too short for the River Rhine, so it didn't survive going back to the Rhine, which is why he then settled in Germany and had family there. So that's as royal as it gets in my knowledge. But overall, I think most humans have some sort of royalty in them somewhere. I think you and we are probably more closely related than most people. It would be interesting to see an actual genetic test, because just from talking to you and the way you put yourself out there, and the kind of donor you try to be, you might be sometimes more sarcastic than I am, and you know, maybe more American, I would almost say, because you've probably been in the US for longer than I've been. Your humor is more American, it seems. But overall, I could definitely see that, and I see that with other donors as well. I think in the way they act and the way they believe in themselves, it might be genetic royalty, because they all seem to have the main character syndrome. You know what the main character syndrome is. So they all believe like I'm the center of the universe, and I have to make the change, I have to make the move, which is, I think, not an unhealthy belief necessarily, because if you believe you're the center of the universe and you treat yourself like that, then you end up healthier and you end up a better, being a better impact on the universe. But yeah, I could definitely see that. But also, royalties, they ended up inbreeding and being unhealthy. And I know some royals in Austria, and they are not healthy donors. So they're very different to us. They're very unhealthy. They drink a lot and they smoke a lot, and they are very heavy for their age. And so I think donors are more kind of the royals of the current and of the future, of the present and of the future. I think donors are doing the most royal thing a man can currently do, and the most important thing a man can currently do, which is to create healthy next generation of life. And it's always been the best thing a man can do. It's just the ways we're doing it now is differently than men have done it a couple hundred years ago.
Do you know how Genghis Khan conquered Asia?
So he was he probably had high testosterone, and then he went to the different villages, and he had children everywhere. In every village there was a child, so they didn't want to attack him anymore, or he didn't want to attack them, or something like that.
He married his daughters off to the princes of every army he encountered. So instead of fighting them, he would combine them. So he won through daughters. So this is a discussion you're going to be having in 20 years, which is something I'm going to be dealing off with very soon. I've got all these daughters. So how can I use the daughters to improve the lives of not just the daughters, but their sisters? So by combining, family power and size, I could expand family assets and wealth, which is something you're familiar with real estate. So I'm approaching that Genghis Khan point right now. So my guess is that Genghis Khan was probably just a bit of a stud in his younger years, and then after he had all these daughters and it was like the age to marry them, he's probably like, you know what, I'll marry each of my daughters off to a prince, and then I'll combine all the armies and I'll have the largest army on the planet. That's what he did. He wiped out something, I think, like 15% of global population, and then put the planet into global cooling because, less people, less fire, less CO2. And we had a mini ice age. So if you ever want to cool the planet off, just go full Genghis Khan and wipe out 15% of the human population. The man did it.
Ice age. I don't think there was an ice age after Genghis Khan. I don't know if that's actual.
The planet cooled off, and they say that part of like what was going on with the weather, it like attributed to the Europeans settling the Americas, 500 years ago. And so like that whole thing's wild. Like what? Like I didn't know any of that, but I guess there was like a mini cooling, and then it warmed up afterwards, and the weather was calm, and you could cross the Atlantic.
Yeah, well, no, some of the donors. Oh, my light is off. This is the longest podcast so far.
Sorry.
No, it's a great conversation. I'm enjoying it. In some parts, sometimes it's you say things, and then I listen to them, and I realize I don't think that's 100%. But
give it 20 years. Give it 20 years. How old is your oldest?
No, with this point, I do overall agree. Not with the ice age after Genghis Khan, but it might have gotten colder. I don't know the facts there. I just don't want listeners to think that when they see this video, oh, whatever he hears, he agrees to, because that's not the type of person I am. But the main point you made, which is that we as donors will in the future also try to have positive impact on the reproductive partner choices of the children, I think is true, is valid. And while some recipients might think, oh no, like might worry about it, at the end of the day, the thing is, it's again just another option we are putting out there. It's not forcing any of the children to actually do that. And I have a great network of like young entrepreneurs and businessmen in Germany who I know will be the future strong men of Germany, because they're moving, they're acting. I don't network too much with like old people who are slow and like own a lot of assets but have no children. I network more with people who have children, because if you don't have any children, then your assets will just run into and real estate makes sense to network with people who don't have children. But in family building, it makes sense to network with people who have large families. And I see a future where my daughters might be interested in other donors, and I know great donors who might look for a wife as well. A lot of donors I know want their own families too, so they could connect to a donor and be the main first wife of another donor, right? And therefore we would connect the strong family tribe of one donor with the strong family tribe of another donor, just like people have been doing it forever in business, right? But what we're going to see again here is we're going to see a shift from money assets to family, land, and health. Connecting family, land, and health. That's really where I think the strength will be in the future. But of course, we have no idea how things are going to go with AI and like ownership and all that kind of stuff. Because if we have like an AI monopole and one person owns all the AI technology, the strongest, and it keeps sucking all the data, then things might happen that I don't know about. But generally speaking, in this kind of family sense, I think, yeah, there will be a future where it will be smart to connect a daughter to an incredibly healthy, strong donor with a strong network, because that's how you make sure that your family becomes stronger. She has more opportunities, and the children they will obviously be like the top notch, because you're a top healthy donor, and the donor is top healthy, so your daughter is healthy. She had a healthy mother. The other donor had a healthy, intentional mother. So you're combining two super intentional, healthy, intelligent human beings in a way that has never been there before. And you're going to grow in the strength and the power into a direction that has never been there before either. So of course, yeah, these people will be beautiful. They will be healthy. They will be intelligent. And combined, they have a leverage that other people cannot compete with. It's just a whole different ballpark, whole different kind of game. And so I'm excited to connect my donor conceived children if they want to. And I mention this all the time because I don't want recipients to think, oh no, he's going to like take control over the family. I don't think Genghis Khan had control over every one of his biological children.
No.
No idea about it. And they still run around, and they might still be in some of the farms and never even know that their father is Genghis Khan. You know, so many people don't know they're related to Genghis Khan, but he's related to hundreds of thousands of people nowadays. But there will be donor conceived children that will come to me and say, Daniel, what I've seen on your Instagram, your social media, the podcast you made with Hung Lo was so interesting. I want to talk to you about this. Do you think that you can find a great a biological father for my children? Do you think you can find a great biological mother for my children? I want to be a donor too. There will be this, and that's why the Open Donor Association is going to have this extra incredible leverage against what we've seen in the last 10 years of all these little individual donors like Jonathan Mayer doing his thing there, Kyle Gordy doing his thing here, you know, you here in Florida doing your thing. When we combine these people and they actually make efforts together, we can cross-refer recipients. We can do a lot on like in the present, but for the future, there's going to be a sibling society for donor-conceived siblings where they can connect and have a strength that you don't have in any other network because of the connection of blood that you have. Plus, you can track it so much better because of social media and like technology nowadays. Genghis Khan could never track all of his kids. Now we can track that much better. We can put like we can market and 23andMe. It's super simple, super easy. $100 per child, easy. You know who's who and who's where. So it's and that's why I'm burning for this project like crazy. That's why I cannot think of anything else all day and all night, because I know what I'm doing as a donor and with the Open Donor Association is going to not shift the future of humanity. It's not going to change it, but it's going to speed up what we're already heading towards.
Diplomacy through marriage. And as far as your charitable organization goes, we definitely need to focus on marketing you to talent agencies. Talent agencies, once they're aware that this donor organization exists, and these are, you know, talented, successful, genial, cordial, smart, intelligent, funny donors available. Think about Elon Musk, 13 children. He's going to have daughters. His daughters are going to want husbands as they grow up. So, you know, who's to say that, you know, you don't have children the same age as his children, that your children aren't going to intermarry. And when his children leave the planet, your children will be leaving the planet. I think this is the success moving forward. And 500 years ago, what we were talking about are Europeans sailing off the continent to America, and who got to leave? Who got to leave Europe and sail to America? That was the position my family was in 500 years ago. My family's been on this continent for a very, very long time. But it's about to happen again. We're at the precipice. So, you know, this is the same conversation, you know, Spain, Portugal, England, France, everybody carving up the new world. Who gets to go? Who gets to leave? The best, the brightest, the strongest, the most successful. How do we leverage ourselves? And you and I are doing it through assisting and helping as many women as possible, or at least the eligible women. I'm very picky about who I donate to. I try not to have children with women that I can't, at least at a minimum, go on a date with, sit down, have dinner with, talk to them, try to get a feel for them. And I would think, you know, as a woman, this being the most important decision any woman could ever make, at least at a bare minimum, please interview your donor, you know, because every week in the groups, we hear some woman talk about how she got scammed out of sending money to somebody who she thought was a donor, which was actually just a call center in India or Pakistan. It's probably 80% of the traffic we see in the Facebook groups.
I mean, it's good that they were scammed rather than getting like homeless donor sperm or something like that.
Yeah. That's what they would get out of the clinics. Like I said, in
or
the clinics,
if you just get anyone's sperm from shipping, you know, recipients trust me a lot because of my personal brand, my Instagram and all that. Like they don't even ask me for tests anymore because they see, oh, this guy, like he's legit. Like he uploads his tests every 3 months. So I don't think they check like every test. Now I do still get tested and they can trust me. Otherwise, if, you know, I would be worried that someone, something happened and then I get into trouble and then no one trusts me anymore. So this trust is very valuable to me. But I've had like men from my past who I'm not friends with anymore, say when I first started as a donor, they said, why don't you just do shipping and for fun, because they don't like lesbian women, let someone else jerk off into the cars.
No. This is the most important decision a woman will ever make. Would you buy a house sight unseen? Would you hire an employee without interviewing them? This is the only decision that a woman will ever make. It'll hopefully outlive her. She'll die. The child will carry on. The child will continue to exist. Every other decision you make in your life ends when you die. That's it. That's the end of it. The game's over. All the Monopoly pieces of Monopoly money go back in the box. Your children are the only real important decision you'll ever make. And when I produce children, I am going to try to produce the best, highest quality product I can produce. I do that, when I build motorcycles or whatever it is I'm engineering, building weapons for the Department of Defense. I build the best product I can build, the highest quality. I don't want to mass produce like a bunch of cheap, products that are going to fall apart. Because one day I'm going to fall apart. I'm going to die. I'm not going to live forever. I'm probably on the older end of the donor spectrum scale. One day I'm going to die. And the only thing that is going to be left here is my children and their ability to depend on each other, to work together, to use that Genghis Khan diplomacy with your children, Gordy's children, Elon Musk's children, to hopefully leave this planet and go somewhere else, as my ancestors did 500 years ago when they settled America. So moving forward, I try to carry that on. And that's probably the way I am. I'm descended from people who got on a boat and left Europe. So it makes sense that it would be my descendants that would get on a boat and left Europe. Musk, he comes from South Africa. There are no white people that naturally come from South Africa. Musk's heritage goes back to European royalty. So they left Europe and they went to South Africa. Now he's left South Africa and moved to America, and his children are probably going to leave this planet. So we just come from a long line of people. As you said, your ancestor was not from Germany. He went there from France. And he traded horses to make it happen. I would suspect that now that you're in America, your children and your grandchildren, when they get the opportunity to get on the spaceships, they're going to leave. So there's probably something genetic going on with our group of people who are, you said donors are very proactive. They all think of themselves as the king, the center of the universe. They're motivated. Every woman I've ever dated, they look for motivated, self-driven men. Those are the businessmen. Those are the men that get things done. They make things happen. You can't hide in your closet at your house and think that something's going to happen. Somebody else is going to do it for you. You've got to get out there and make it happen. You've got to be the change. And even when that comes to dating or being a popular donor or helping out recipients, you've got to be proactive. You've got to go out there. You've got to market yourself. You want to catch a lot of fish? You've got to use a bigger net. You had asked me about some of the posts I put out there, and like I said, I always try to break the ice for women that show up nervous, after spending $50,000 on a fertility clinic. The other thing I try to do, though, is I try to warn women about the scams. And you mentioned there's a lot of shipping scams. The biggest scam of all is the fertility clinics. When their donors, their homeless street donors die, they don't even destroy the product. They continue to sell it, and they don't keep tabs on who dies, or there's no real limits to how many people they sell that product to, because when a woman gets pregnant, she doesn't report it. And there's two sides to every coin. The other side of the coin is that when a lesbian woman gets pregnant from having a heterosexual affair, they frequently cover that up from their lesbian spouse by going to a clinic. So they might show up at the fertility clinic already pregnant, just bring their spouse there and, have them hold their hand and say, look, I'm having a baby now. It's like, lady, you're already a week or two pregnant, but whatever. The physician will take the money, and the whole thing is a ruse. It's a cover-up. A lot of lesbian women are not being honest with their spouse about how they achieved pregnancy or the timing when they became pregnant. So as a donor, you need to kind of keep that in the back of your mind. Like, okay, there's two sides to every coin. Is the woman I'm speaking to, is she already pregnant? Is she having a heterosexual affair and she's just covering all this up? There are legit recipients out there, and like I said, the industry really tries to take advantage of them.
Yeah, the majority of recipients are fine. And
the majority are legit.
Yeah, from what I talked to Ari Nagel, Kyle Gordy, some other donors that have like 60, 70 successes, something like that. What I've heard overall is if you don't screen your recipients, between 3 and 5% end up making troubles and causing pain. I think you can lower that risk to 1% if you do screen very well. You still always have a risk. And I told my friends from Germany, I built after I had my first business in Germany when I was 19, went really well for 2 years, went bankrupt when I was 23. And then I set up communities for entrepreneurs and businessmen because I was like, I wanted equally like-minded people around me. And they're still running these communities of charitable German communities. And one, I was a co-founder. I didn't really have to do anything with it after. And the other one is I'm still like board of directors. And I asked, I said there's going to be an article about me in Germany, one of the main German newspapers. They have like 1 million followers on Instagram. They're fairly big in Germany. And I asked like, hey guys, I will be in German news for my work as a donor. Is there anyone out here wanting to reproduce, right? You would think, oh, choice is obvious. And then only 1 out of 120 really healthy, good-looking, hardworking men, it was all like entrepreneurs. Only one of them decided to move forward, work with me on this. And the others were worried about like, oh no, the child will grow up without a dad, which I have done myself, and I have founded that fucking community. So they should be fine with fatherless children, at least in a single mother by choice situation. Single mothers by choice very different than single mothers not by choice. The statistics are different. Single mothers by choice, the children are performing better than nuclear families, average nuclear families, and those nuclear families are performing better than single mothers not by choice. It has to do with like intentionality and finances and planning and blah, blah, blah. And, a single mother can't divorce, obviously. So there's other factors that make nuclear families weaker than single mothers by choice, like my mother was one, which is not to say it was easy childhood. She was a full-time professor of psychology, so she was working 40, 50 hours a week, raising 2 boys. Hierarchy was crazy during our teenage years. She couldn't really handle it very well at some points. But, I think a hard childhood makes for an easy life, and an easy childhood makes for a hard life. So I don't necessarily agree 100% with I have to get along with my recipients because I want the child to have like a nice upbringing. I think a rough upbringing can be fine. And my mother, she would have not gotten along with my donor father in her harsh times when she had hard times. And my father is very different to my mother. I don't think they would have gotten along, but it still turned out to be like my brother. He went to Cambridge University and he's now going to Yenching, and after that he's going to do his master's at Yale. So he's performing well on the academic level. I'm performing well on the reproductive level. So we're doing well overall. And I hope to connect to my brother into the donor industry someday. But the academia people are very different to us donors, way less practical, more theoretical. But they're smart. So if they want to make a change at some point, if they have a big drive for something at some point, they can make the change because they know how to learn, how to adapt, and how to maybe even execute, hopefully even execute at some point. But yeah, I forgot the point I wanted to make here because I got lost in so many things I wanted to share with you just to give you a better picture of who I am and what I do. But overall, what I was saying was, yeah, you're mitigating the risk. And these men, they didn't want to become a donor because there's a risk involved in biological fatherhood. And that's the weakest fucking thing that I hear, right? There is a risk involved in fatherhood, but it's also the greatest thing you could do with your life is creating another life. There's nothing better. I don't care about Mars and like this and that and spaceships. I think there's nothing better than to create another person's life, because that person could become the first person on Mars. That person could be Elon, the next Bill Gates, whatever. And it's crazy to me to see that, we have these men who are in their late 20s and they say like, oh no, there's a 1% risk that something might happen to my assets or whatever. So I'm not going to do this or go into this. But it's also a self-selective mechanism. It's natural selection to some degree as well. And I don't think it's just like lineage or like royal lineage or anything like that necessarily. I think that, evolution means, having a bunch of kids and them going and doing a bunch of different things, right? I'm the only donor-conceived donor of all my half-siblings. There's another 10 or so half-brothers. A few are very young, so they might look at my path and might become donors. I hope that I can make this a real family business, and more people in my family will do it. I help these donors build their personal brands and like get recipient referrals and stuff like that. And I'm doing that also because I hope to build the systems and processes that my kids can step into that someday as well. I'm not just doing that because I'm like, oh yeah, fun. There's money to be made here. No, I'm setting up something bigger, bigger organizations that my kids can jump into someday as well. But yeah, I mean, this conversation could go on forever. I mean, it's been such a nice talk with you. We definitely have to do this again.
Absolutely.
Do you use WhatsApp at all?
I don't. I've honestly never used it. Even when I would slip over in Asia, I knew it was popular. But what I'm trying to tell you, young man, is by the time you get to my age, you're going to start limiting things in your life. You don't want more, you want less,
Yeah,
especially when you've got a lot of kids. One final question I've got for you. Being kind of new to this and being young, so we've got a slightly different generational perspective. What advice would you give to first-time donors and first-time recipients when their child starts asking to meet the donor father? Because it's going to happen to every single donor and every single recipient. The child is going to ask. Do you have any advice to give? Any suggestions?
Well, my mother told me as long as I can remember that I'm donor conceived, and she always told me I chose the best donor I could find in this entire world. Now, my father is a great guy, but he's not like the president of the United States, so or whatever. He's an awesome awesome biological father to have. But she was really good about framing him as the biggest, best person out there. Even though she didn't even know him, she didn't even know if he was the best donor in this world. But she told me I chose the best donor, and that did a lot to me when I was a child. That said, I come from a better background than most people in my school, and I maybe felt that way a bit. And then I had these half siblings, so I felt like I was something special, and I was. No one else had as many half siblings as myself. No one else had the opportunity to travel to the U.S. My father, when he reached out to me when I was 15, he invited me to California. We went on a trip to Yosemite National Park. It was chill. He's like a close uncle to me. He's closer to me than my mother's brother, actually. My mother's brother is very different to me, and I don't have a lot in common with him. He's also a smart, intelligent guy, but the things he prioritizes in his life and the way he lives his life is not the way I would do. But my father, on the other hand, he has a lot with me in common. So I'm very happy, and I think that if you choose a great donor, you don't have to worry about like a negative impact on your child. Everything else in the environment of this world, like the subset, the average that this environment in this world is affecting your child, television, social media, friends in school, people outside, they're all going to want less for your child than what the donor wants. So if you chose a good donor, you should be able to be confident in that choice enough to a point where you would be open to your child reaching out to that donor as soon as it asks the question. So be open to your child as soon as your child can talk and ask questions, and as soon as you can try and explain the background, explain how you chose the donor. And then I tell my recipients, they have my portfolio, they have my Instagram account, they can share that with the child first, and then the child can decide, is this someone I want to reach out to or not? Some of my half siblings I have nothing in common with. They're very different. For example, they might be very artsy. I'm not a very artsy person. Like I don't enjoy drawing or singing all day. I enjoy like getting shit done. And so we are a bit different there, but it's still nice to have a network and to know them and to meet them at least once. Some of my half siblings were never really interested in even like meeting me in person, or their other half siblings. They never made it a priority, which I think they're missing out on. Right? It's kind of like my father likes to say, it's about the time you waste and the people you didn't meet. So when you are open to meeting people, then you don't have to worry about missing out on too much, because you meet those people. But also with the wrong people, you don't want to waste too much time. And for some of your donor conceived children, you might be the wrong person to be around because they don't like the way you are or whatever. And for others, you might be just the right kind of role model that they were seeking or that they need in balance to whatever kind of role models they have at home. So it's very different individual, but the choice should be up to the child. And I think that, again, like nature will find its way. We can either buffer it and like make it find its way slower and later look back and regret what we did, or we can try and like push nature towards the best optimal outcome, or into future that it's heading to anyways. Everyone in AI knows we're going to be in a future of super intelligence. So the players in the industry of AI, they're pushing super intelligence, and they're not buffering it. And by not pushing it is already a way of buffering it. But then you also have people that say, oh no, blah, 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 this, that. Well, it doesn't matter what you say. It's going to be there anyways. You might make it harder and you might regulate AI now, but if you don't do it, China will do it, right? So someone will do it. And it's the same with life and with nature. It will find its way. Nature is stronger than us. Earth is stronger than us. Our families are bigger than we are individually. So they will find a way to survive. You can be part of that survival. You can be push that nature, or you can try and push against it and eventually lose the fight. And some things like genetics and family is just something I wouldn't want to take a fight with. I wouldn't want to start a fight with, which is why it's important to be cooperative and open to the donor as well.
Excellent point, young man. I couldn't have put it better myself. When you make the best decision you can possibly make, you can't regret it, because that's the best option there is. And I think everyone in the community can agree that when you choose a known donor, that is the best decision, because it is the only decision in which the child can ever meet the biological father. That is not possible using an anonymous donor through a cryobank. So every day we strive to make the best decision.
A good donor, yes, but an anonymous donor can be better than the worst open donor.
The worst known donor. So women should always screen, and I advise the same thing to donors. Donors, screen your recipients screen your donors. Always meet in person for a date. If you can't meet the person, if you can't physically meet the person, 99% of the time they don't exist, and there's something else going on here, and it's probably some kind of financial scam. I see it almost every day. You need to meet the person in the flesh, make sure they're real. And now that AI exists, if you think that AI isn't going to be used to influence how people do this, and this biological transaction, I assure you, right now, fertility clinic owners are about to use AI to drive business their way and away from known donors. They will use it just as another marketing tool, just as the $9 billion industry has lobbied Congress to prevent the same-sex Equal Rights Reproduction Act from being passed in U.S. Congress and written into federal legislation. It's a very profitable industry and business, and they intend to keep that control and power, even if that means hurting a specific group of people like lesbian women and their children, which they've done now for decades, and they're going to continue to do it. And if you don't believe what I'm saying, that's fine. Just go listen to one of Adam Hooper's 75 interviews, or I think Laura High's up to 55 or 60. She's the product of this. Her father is a fertility physician, and he will not speak to her. That is not good for her psychologically. That's not healthy. She doesn't know who her siblings are, or whether or not she ended up dating her own brother. I think known donors are the future, and I think you and I are on the right path. We are on the righteous path, and I will continue to fight the good fight as you have done. Young man, I applaud you for having me on your show. Excellent interview. And the one piece of advice I have for you moving forward is to get your charitable organization in touch with every talent agency in the state of Florida, because not only are we cheaper than spending $70,000 at a cryo facility, we are the only option in which our children can meet us. And that is paramount to the health and psychology of the children. It really is.
Who do I talk to? Who do I connect to there in Florida? Like, what do I Google? Or do you have, if you have contacts or people, even if it's open donors that want to join the association?
Up on Google Maps, and just make a list of every talent agency within you, and just start going down the list, just like you would, just marketing. Make 4 or 5 calls an hour, and call every talent agent in your immediate area, and then start branching out. And what's going to happen is you're going to find talent agents who do work with like Chippendales, like Mail Review. And what you're going to realize is, they're not just hired for modeling jobs or acting, like Vin Diesel. Vin Diesel was like a Chippendale.
Talent agencies are actually, they help people get paid and work in their field, and they take a little commission. And they do that. There's talent agents who do that for donors. So people reach out to talent agents to find a donor. That wouldn't be the first place I would look as a recipient.
Let's say you're that wealthy Latin model in Miami, and you've got a lot of money and you want the best of the best. Your husband's like 70-year-old attorney. You're not going to have children with him. You're going to start looking at photos of men. Let me tell you a secret about Facebook. I was one of the first members. I was in college when Mark Zuckerberg was in. And when they first started Facebook, you could only join if you were part of the college email system. It was strictly college students. I got the invitation like the first or second day. I was friends with Mark. The Facebook is the book at the fertility clinic with the faces of all the donors in it. That's what a Facebook is. So when Mark created Facebook from day one, he actually created Facebook as just a digital copy of the Facebook at the fertility clinic. So now you understand what Mark was doing to pay for things when he was in college and what myself and Kyle Gordy were doing. Okay. So now it makes sense. Now that you know that a Facebook is actually just the book of the men's faces at the fertility clinic, you understand that Mark Zuckerberg probably has a lot of children, a whole lot.
Maybe. I wonder, I do regularly wonder, these guys, these big business guys, that they must have more children. There's no way, because they're intelligent, they're smart, they know what they're doing. So there must be a way that they find to have more children anonymously, because if they did it openly, they would be sued for child support. So the only
Like
way,
Elon Musk, yeah.
right, the only way they can do it is go through the fertility system. Elon Musk, I think he was paying like $500,000 for one of his ex-wives, and like $500K a year, and she was upset because it wasn't enough. So she was like, I have to sell my Cybertruck because $500,000 a year is not enough to raise a child.
So if you're this, to answer your question, if you're this wealthy model in Miami, which Tom Brady's wife is a wealthy model, just think about what I'm saying to you. You're this wealthy model in Florida, and you see Tom Brady on TV, and you say, I want that guy off that commercial. You call Tom Brady's agent, and then Tom Brady's agent calls Tom Brady and says, hey, this wealthy model, Gisele Bundchen, wants to have your children. Tom Brady has children with Gisele Bundchen. So if now you understand what I'm saying to you. So like last month, some paparazzi photos came out of some photos of Tom Cruise with Sydney Sweeney. Tom Cruise is twice Sydney Sweeney's age.
Mm-hmm.
So that was arranged through their agents, through their talent.
Yeah, a lot of that is talent agents and like setting it up. So that makes sense. So you think I should personally work with the talent agent for like the work I do as a donor, or do you think I should talk to talent agents and ask them like, who of your clients is interested in becoming an open donor, and then I could market them? Well, that's
excellent question. Excellent question. I've got the perfect business model for you. My first manager was a flamboyant middle-aged gay man that owned a dance studio. But boy, oh boy, did he know how to sell men. he loved the product. So he set up a website. This is 20 years ago. Sets up a website, and it's a Facebook. It's just a website with photos of men. You click on what you want. It's a book full of face photos. It's a Facebook. That's what you're going to have to do. So build your website, put the fake names on there, Johnny Walker, whatever you want to call these guys, Sergeant Paradise. I think I was Sergeant Paradise for a bit. I worked with Johnny Walker, and women are going to see the photos. They'll click on what they like, what they want. You're marketing men. You're selling a product. You're selling stud service, or however you want to put it. Take that business model, that website, and say, hey, this is what I represent. Reach out to other talent agencies, because what's going to happen is you're going to be doing like a real estate deal with them. So they're going to be like the buyer's agent. You're the seller's agent. Okay. You're the seller's agent. You've got the listing, you've got the contact for the guy in the photo. They've got the contact with the buyer. So it's just like a real estate transaction. There's a real estate agent for the buyer. There's a real estate agent for the seller. That's how the talent agencies function, and the talent management.
And they can be both buyers or seller. They might have good open donors too.
Correct. So on your website, if women start seeing your website and they're familiar with your website through, let's say they see it in a Facebook sperm donation group. Okay. And I'm sorry, run the name of it, of your company by me one more time, the charity.
It's Open Donor.
Open Donor Association. Sorry, we'll have to put it up higher above your head. It's blocking the camera, but okay. So Open Donor Association, they'll see the ad for that. They'll go to the website. Okay. And some of the people coming there, it'll be, the talent management agent representative for the talent agency, but some of it will be the customer direct. So you'll get both sides of the deal. Okay. So then you reach out to the donor and you say, hey, donor XYZ, Sergeant Paradise, we've got a young lady in Fort Lauderdale. She's interested. Uh, could you make a date with her? And that whole thing is really just marketed through, what do they call that? Escort service. I worked as a chauffeur and a bodyguard for many, many years, and that's completely legal. Okay. Chauffeuring people around and escorting them around is legal. Working and functioning as a bodyguard is legal. Working as a real estate agent is completely legal. These are all legal professions. Nobody looks down on them or frowns on them. I'm sure Tom Brady has more children than just Gisele Bündchen. But think about it. Some wealthy model saw an athlete on TV. Her agent called his agent. She got the children out of him. That's exactly what happened. Nobody is going to argue with me on that. That is 100% the facts. Sydney Sweeney was just photographed from, paparazzi with Tom Cruise. We know what's going on. Nobody's stupid here. Tom Cruise's agent called Sweeney's agent. We know what happened.
Yeah, interesting. That's cool. Well, that's a very nice idea. I love that idea. I put that down on my to-do list. From every podcast and interview I do, there's something new for me to execute on. So this is this one.
So step one, you're going to build your Facebook on your website, and don't put the guys' names on your, give everybody a stage name, Captain Kong or whatever. Okay. So there's your men. Okay. So here's your repertoire. This is your all male review. Okay. And then get that in touch with the buyer's agents. So start calling, talent management, say, hey, whether you're running an escort service or, these are chauffeurs or they're bodyguards, however you want to market it. I own multiple businesses. And the more I talk to you, the more it's going to make the words I'm saying to you, they're going to make sense just because I'm speaking to you from experience and I've been in this game for a long time. But it is still cheaper and better than what the fertility clinics offer. And we are the only option as to which the children could ever meet the donor father. And I love children. I love going to birthday parties and dinners and staying the night with the moms. I love having romantic relationships with the mothers of the children. I love these women. I love these children. And that's never going to change. There's nothing that anybody's going to say or do. Most of the women that criticize me and hate me, it's usually obese women on the low end of the dating scale. And I'm just something they don't have access to. So they want to deny every other woman of it. They try to cock block all the other women in hopes of raising their sexual marketplace value. They're still always going to be like a 1 to 3. They're never going to be a 7 or 8. They're never going to be Sydney Sweeney or Gisele Bündchen. They just want to cock block everybody else. If they can't have Tom Brady, nobody can. Misery loves company. Come on, ladies, wake up.
Yeah,
that's all it is, man.
There's a lot of mate suppression between women. I think women should learn about mate suppression in school, actually, because it starts happening in school. But yeah, moving forward, I would love if you got WhatsApp just for the Open Donor Association. I think you should add the Open Donor Association into your life, because I'm sure that it's not just going to be very interesting and fun for you to meet all these other open donors, but more so for your biological offspring, your future children, to have this connection, this place, this safe space for open donors that you can tap into, a network of men who on average have 50 to 100 biological offspring. We don't have anything like that in the world right now, and you would count as an OG donor, so you wouldn't have to pay any membership. Usually we have like a little $25 a month membership thing for the general community. But I would love to have you there. We have weekly campfire calls if you ever want to join them. We have like a church every Sunday where we talk about, fertility and reproduction and setting ourselves up and the children. So it's basically like once a week. And we have donors from the UK, from Spain, from the US. And we filter very selectively with who we allow even into just this general community. So I'd love to invite you there. And then, I'll send you all the information for that over so you can decide yourself if you want to do that or not. And otherwise, we can also have another conversation. I'd love to meet you in person, actually, after all I've heard, because I'm sure you would be open to sharing more in person when it's not recorded and we sign maybe an NDA or something like that, so that we can talk about other things that you might not want to share with the public. And that would be maybe fun, or we could also have another podcast in the future. But I want to make sure my circadian rhythm has to be on point. I have to get some sleep, so my sperm quality is top notch tomorrow morning again. I hope you do the same. Be good with your sperm. You got maybe another 5, 10, 15 years if you push it. Take care of yourself.
Who knows?
So take care of yourself, get to sleep, and it was great talking to you.
You too, young man. I thank you for the interview, and good luck in your endeavors if I don't see you again.
Thank you so much. Take care. Bye bye, Hung Lo.
Have a good night, sir.
Good night.